Hi, it's Todd from Todd's Workshop here, and I'm with Will Sherman
from Medieval Arrows
down at his forge, and he's made this fantastic series of medieval arrows for me. Not everything that was ever out there, but you know, quite a lot of them. So we're just going to talk arrows because we've got a lot to say about it, probably more than you want to hear. So we're just going to go through and just talk about these arrows that I've got in my hand. So start at the beginning. This one happens to be what type?
We call that a Type 6 or a H1 hunting head, yeah.
Okay, so it's a Type 6, it's a forked, birding, like small game hunting head. Anyway, but that's not the point of this. Arrow, tell me about it.
Okay, so, I mean, you know as well as I do that arrows come in millions of different shapes and sizes and lengths and that kind of thing. We're still learning what they were using. We're still learning that one general arrow never existed. It was about bow weights and uses and distance and that kind of thing. But
I'm going to stop.
Okay.
So before we go on though, cloth yard or arrow. So the cloth yard, which is taken to be 36 inches because that is the length of a modern yard.
Yep.
I don't know if that's the case. If a cloth yard was 36 modern inches, I don't know if that was the case or not.
Nor do I.
However, what we do know is the only source for close to medieval arrows we have are off the Mary Rose. And
well, we've got medieval arrows.
Oh, have we?
Westminster Abbey arrow,
one.
1430s.
Yeah, but one.
One. Yeah.
Okay, so arrow, not arrows.
And depending on when medieval started, we've got earlier ones as well, so 1100s. So post-Hastings,
okay,
we've got those existing as well.
Okay, we're going to come back to that. So the Mary Rose arrows were basically two lengths, weren't they? Like 28.5 and 30.5 inches or something?
Exactly, yeah.
But nothing approaching 36 inches.
No, nowhere near.
So that's the first thing that we'd say. But they were in Mary Rose, which was 1546, so it's...
45.
45, I'm sorry. Oops. So that is, let's say, 150 years after the heyday of English archery. But they were in two distinct lengths, weren't they? There wasn't sort of much in between 28.5 and 30.5, was there? It was like 28.5, like big and small.
I mean, they go down to 22 inches.
Off the Mary Rose?
Off the Mary Rose, yeah. And
Seriously?
the longest one is 32, dead on almost. But there are 3,500 arrows, and there are two massive peaks of averages, 28.5 and 30.5.
Okay. And then going back, because I didn't know that actually, so I didn't realise we had earlier arrows. So sort of post-Hastings, so what you're saying, 11th, 10th, 12th century?
Yeah, so the Siege of Waterford in Ireland was 1170. Yeah. And they've got two arrows that came up there, and they've got one in Dublin. So we're from the same time period, so 12th century, 11th century. And they're really short, really light, but very definitely military arrows.
Hold that place. So this, you were showing me earlier, was the Waterford arrow, did you say?
That's the one, yeah. One of the two, yeah.
So this one's not for me, much to the shame, but if we compare that to, what are these, 30.5?
Yeah.
So check out the difference in size between those two.
But this is a real arrow. This is an exact copy dimensionally of the arrow that was found at Waterford. There were two of them. It's made in pine, as that one was, 8mm in diameter, 21.5 inches. So
that is a military arrow?
Yep. Got a military head. It was found with the head, a Type 7 needle bodkin.
So when we're talking draw lengths on that?
It's a chest draw. Same as the wire tapestry.
What, as in straight on like that?
Yep.
Really?
Yep.
Oh, learning day for all of us.
Yeah.
Wow. They shot like that?
Yeah.
I never knew that. Oh, fantastic. Why?
Why not?
85 reasons?
We know of an arrow draw being this.
Yeah, but you have some ability to sight down it if you're doing that. I mean, that's like shooting from the hip, isn't it?
I think it gives you more of a sight down that arrow. Depending on where your body is, if you're shooting here, you can look down the arrow in front of you. Once you're back behind your ear...
Well, I suppose you get a very good line off that.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. You get a good line off it, but the up and down not so good.
And that's just instinct,
that one is better for the up and down, but less good for the line.
Possibly sight down it, yeah, because it's across your body.
Huh. There you go.
But the whys and wherefores are somewhat irrelevant because we know they exist. To the Nock, everything is exact. The fletching glue is there, the binding is there, the Nock is there.
I disagree. The whys and the wherefores are not
irrelevant.
That's everything.
That's everything. Okay.
That's everything. But that is like check that weird one out, because the bulbous Nock is an earlier thing that fell out by 13th century.
No, see again, that's another question we need to ask. We don't know when that gave way for the horn insert.
So
there you go, take that one there.
Has that got a bulbous? No, it's got normal. You've got one with a bulbous Nock here somewhere. Yeah. So what I mean by the bulbous Nock is this one here, which you can see on the Waterford arrows are saying that it swells out. I'm guessing a much more time-consuming way of making a shaft. It seems wrong. But if we come back to the medieval, there you can see here that you're just planing straight down the shaft. So it's got to be a much faster shaft to make.
Well, it's a faster shaft to make, but then you've got to very carefully saw or split the end. You've got to prepare a piece of horn from a block of horn. That's got to be glued in place, clamped in place. You're still putting a lot of time into that one end.
Right.
Whereas here you do it all with a knife. And it just comes out of your natural arrow shaft.
Swings and roundabouts, winners and losers. Okay.
I mean, when I make them myself, they take the same amount of time for me to make.
Oh.
So a bulbous or flattened knock and a horn insert, they take the same amount of time.
I wouldn't have expected that.
But what you don't want really is to be shooting really big, wide knocks off a very heavy bow. So at some point, the bow weight got to a point where the knock got smaller and smaller for ease and comfort.
And presumably because of knocking on the side of the bow as it goes through?
Possibly. I'm not sure about that. I just know that it's not very comfortable.
Right.
These work better with a pinch draw as well, actually. To be shooting, you can shoot them off a heavy bow, but I think this is more designed for a very heavy bow, and this is just the norm. What's interesting is that we've got artwork showing that knock up to the 1400s and beyond. So we don't know when that came in.
Right.
The earliest record we've got of this knock is the Westminster Abbey arrow from the 1430s. Before that point, they may have been using these.
But so again, when we're talking of the Westminster Abbey arrow, that is the only English medieval arrow we have?
Yeah, if you don't count Tudor as medieval, then yeah.
So one of the problems is that we base so much of our knowledge on Mary Rose finds because there was so much of it. But the problem is that's naval archery, which could well be different to battlefield archery. The requirements are different, so there shouldn't be an expectation it's the same. But also it is 150 years later. Tactics have changed, armour has changed, society has changed. So we can only really use the Mary Rose finds as a thinking guide, not as an answer.
It shows us how they were made. It shows us how long they were at that point. We actually get quite a good idea of what heads they were using. They were barbed heads. We know that now. We know how big the feathers were and what the glues were, but we have no concept of what was before that until Westminster Abbey, 1430. So almost 100 years beforehand, which is a very different arrow.
And that is a sample size of one. Which in statistics is the same as a sample size of none, basically. Okay. So anyway, there was a sidetrack for you. You're going to get a flavour of what this is about. Carry on telling us about the arrow.
So your arrows are made for your bow, for £85, £90 bow. To your draw length. So we're talking about an ash arrow shaft that's been spined to that weight. 10 millimetres at the knock, down to 8 or 9 millimetres, not counting this bulbous one. Yeah, that's your standard one. Horn insert at the end, tapered piece of horn, cow or buffalo. You've got.
So buffalo's an interesting one because
they weren't using buffalo back then.
But buffalo were in Italy,
right?
So I have to assume it would be possible. I mean,
it existed,
and goodness, the Venetians like to trade, so or the other city-states. So there's no reason it couldn't be buffalo.
There is one reason. The grain. Right. So cow horn grows in a different way.
Okay.
So the grain of cow horn is across where the string's going to go, and buffalo horn is not. So you actually find that you'll get more failures today with archers making arrows out of buffalo horn inserts than you would if they were using cow horn.
Okay, and they would have known that.
Well, we've got the cow horn from the Mary Rose to copy,
But they would have known that, and also cow horn being local, so it's going to be better.
Yeah.
All right, I just assumed there'd be no reason not to. But
yeah, you can split cow horn, and it works with the grain that you want to split it at, and it works against the string angle.
Right.
So it's way stronger as an actual shock absorber than buffalo horn would be.
Okay. And ash shafts. So you look at Roger Ascham's work, which is what, 1513?
1546.
Toxophilus?
Yep.
I thought it was way before that. Really?
Yeah, 1544 to 46, yeah.
I'm disbelieving him. Who knows?
Get your phone out.
No, I'm not going to get my phone out. Anyway, so Toxophilus was a book written by a guy called Roger Ascham, who was Queen Elizabeth's tutor, amongst other things, and taught her archery, apparently. But he wrote a...
So
kind of
manuscript
up
on
him-
shooting, yeah.
up himself book a little bit, I think it's fair
Yeah.
to say. He definitely had opinions that people should definitely shoot like this and definitely do that. But saying that, it's a gold mine.
Yep.
But he lists a whole raft of woods that are suitable
Yeah.
for arrows.
Yeah, you've got Brazil wood in there. You've got sugar chest, which is either sweet chestnut or it's the exotic wood that they were using to transport sugar in on ships.
Oh, right, don't know which.
Beech, hazel, birch, ash,
Yeah.
everything. Yeah,
Because hazel's an interesting one, because that's like well soft.
it is, but so is willow, and there are willow arrows on the Mary Rose.
Are there?
Yeah, and they're big 40mm arrowheads for the willow arrows, so they're just compensating for the softness by making the arrow bigger.
Yeah.
They were using.
I'm loving this. I am learning so much. God, I'd never thought that.
Walnut, alder, elder. They were using everything they could get hold of.
Preference? You know, as in statistical?
So, I mean, we don't know. There's no written record of what they were preferring, but we've got some interesting records from the 1400s where they banned the making of aspen clogs and patterns for
Yeah.
underneath your shoes because aspen arrow shafts were running out.
Aspen's basically poplar.
Poplar,
isn't it?
yeah, it's white poplar. What we don't know, though, is whether those arrows were for military use or for civilian use. And there were going to be more arrows made for civilian use because of practice than there would be for military. We also know they were making 2 or 3 whitewood bows for every one yew bow by law.
Yeah.
So they're supplying potentially lower quality archery equipment.
Knowing it.
So maybe the aspen was used for that. But the majority of the Mary Rose arrows were black poplar.
Okay.
So that was their preference.
Because, I mean, the funny thing about aspen is it's poplar. It's just not a wood that we really use these days.
No.
So I know they use it on pallets and things like that because it's really tough, stringy, grainy stuff. It's really quite difficult to break. But it was a very popular shield wood. And, you know, if you go back and look at some of my videos where I'm, lockdown longbow ones particularly, I'm shooting at a poplar shield. And I'm just putting holes all over it. And it's still there. You know, it's an incredibly
quite fibrous,
tough wood. Not stiff, definitely not stiff, and not heavy.
Yeah, it's light.
But it's tough.
Yeah. So it makes sense to make an arrow which is going to be subjected to a lot of force out of it. But in terms of other preferences, we've got loads of amazing records from the Tower of London, and they explicitly list ash as their sheaf arrow wood.
Right.
So 599 sheaves of ash arrows, for example, over 2,500 arrows of ash mentioned, with the context of the word sheaf in a military setting. So they were using ash for military arrows. The Mary Rose, they were using majority black poplar with other woods in there as well. So we don't really know what they were using as a standard. Maybe there wasn't a standard. They were just making millions of arrows.
Yeah. So, I mean, I have a utterly ungrounded hypothesis here, which is going back to the naval warfare side of the Mary Rose, is the targets you're going to be facing are going to be predominantly unarmoured. It's crew members, it's people up in the rigging, it's that kind of stuff that you're going for. So armour is not a thing, so you're not looking for armour penetration. Ash carries a lot of weight with it. So, you know, a lot of weight, a lot of impact energy, momentum, and so on. So there's a good reason to use heavier arrows if you're trying to go through stuff.
Yep.
But by the time you get to the naval context of 1545, 46, whichever, you're going to be looking for other things because armour penetration is not relevant anymore. And so, really relevant. So what I'm wondering is, did they drift away from the ash shafts and into the lighter woods like poplar to give you the extra distance? So you've lost advantage in that there are firearms and stuff like that around. But the bottom line is you're now giving something to the bows that they didn't have before, which is an extra 20, 30, 40 paces off them, something like that. Because the other thing about the Mary Rose arrows is, didn't the heads get incredibly light at times or something as well?
I mean, they've only found 2 heads ever on that ship. Both of them are now missing. Both of them were barbed, but they were both barbed.
Yeah, okay. And do we have weights on them?
No.
Oh, really?
No,
But
they weren't great big Type 9 plate cutting arrowheads. They weren't using those. The sockets that are left on the arrow shaft, the cone, wouldn't support a big heavy bodkin. We know they were barbed, we know they were light, and we know they were short. So they're not trying to go through plate armour.
Yeah.
The arrows are light, the heads are light. They're thinking, like you said, distance, speed.
Yeah, I figure it's that, because you might be hitting the 320, 340 paces, not the 260
Yeah.
that you get with a Agincourt arrow,
Yeah.
if you like.
Yeah. Interestingly, in 1495, there was a French document written called The Art of Archery. And in there, he says, ash is only good for proving armour.
Oh, really?
So you can use whatever you want for arrows, for flight, butt, and target. He lists those. But if you're proving armour, you use ash.
Yeah.
So we know that in a military context of against plate, ash is the choice. But why are they all popular in 1540s? I guess that's your theory works for that. Because they're not going against plate.
Yeah, I mean, I've got no evidence to it. It's just
No.
that I'm just figuring that they were looking for someone else.
Yeah. The armour's so good at that point. Why waste?
You're not going to go through
Yeah,
it.
yeah. So why waste time and material trying to make these great big heavy arrows? Train up people who can shoot really heavy arrows a really long way. You don't need to.
Yeah.
Because the end goal is to kill at the end, armour or not.
Yeah.
So
Well, I'm guessing all the statutes about practice are going to be pretty much falling out of date by the 1520s, 30s.
Yeah, I think so.
So you are going to be shorter of the number of really good archers that you had 100 years before.
Yep.
Okay. Well, let's talk fletchings. We haven't got very far yet.
Okay, so your arrows are fletched with swan feathers, which again, Mary Rose came up with swan feathers. We know that. They would have used everything from goose to heron to crane to swan, whatever they could get their hands on.
Predominantly waterbirds. I know
Yes.
it doesn't have to be only waterbirds, but it seems to be.
Yeah, there's a reason for it. They've got this lovely oil line on their
Yeah.
feathers. If you cut to that, you get a natural template of an arrow fletching, which is
Right.
really neat. And they're stiffer than most other birds. So I do quite a nice display when I'm talking to people. I have an arrow fletched with buzzard and kestrel feathers and peregrine feathers. And you'd think massive, powerful bird of prey, fast, must make the best fletchings. But they're very soft and light and would never stabilise a heavy arrow. Whereas a big, heavy swan feather is ideal for that. And they are tied with silk. Again, we know that from the Mary Rose and from historical records, they were using silk.
Okay, but I mean, that has to ask the question, why silk? Why not linen or...
It's incredibly strong. So you can get a very fine thread, which has a lot of power and a lot of
less
strength behind
drag,
it.
I suppose?
I suppose so, but I mean, in terms of the actual fletching process of binding the feather on, you don't want it breaking all the time, because that's
Okay, yeah.
bloody
I
irritating.
was saying a bit of leather last night where it kept doing that.
Oh, really? Well, there you go.
Frustrating as hell.
I find it with linen quite a lot. If the linen is thin enough to look accurate historically, it tends to snap quite a lot.
And I bet, to be fair, our industrial linen now is better than their hand-spun linen.
Yeah,
then
quite
for strength.
possibly. But silk won't break on you. It just doesn't. So very fine, very light.
Start with the so silk doesn't.
So silk doesn't break on you at that diameter. So you can put quite a lot of force behind it while you're binding your feather on.
Yeah.
And the silk doesn't keep snapping on you, which is quite important.
Yeah.
And they're bound over this glue, and the glue is, that's a whole other discussion really, but the glue is
Far
beeswax.
away.
Well, okay, so my research for years has been looking into what on earth this stuff is, and it's still ongoing, and we're still looking at the Mary Rose, and actually we're doing some new
So
research
we've got
at the
analysis
moment.
of the Mary Rose? As in chemical analysis, you know,
Yeah.
so we know what it is.
We've got a basic analysis. They've found 3 elements in there. What we don't know yet is where these elements came from on the animal and around the animal. So we're looking into that at the moment.
So what are they?
Beeswax
Yeah.
is the main ingredient. Animal fat and an oxide, like a copper or iron oxide for colour or whatever it is that we're using it for.
So glue is not what I would call that substance.
No, I mean, it's not an adhesive. Again, an interesting thing in the Art of Archery, 1495, you've got 2 arrow types, glued and waxed. And he writes that down.
Ah.
And there are arrows in existence that have feathers still in place with no binding, no wax. They're just glued on from that time period. And we've got the Mary Rose and the Westminster Abbey arrows, which are waxed arrows. So bound into this wax-based compound. Compound's a better word for it.
Yeah. Cool. So you, presumably, for it to adhere to the feathers, it has to be hot or hottish.
Yeah, so you apply it hot, let it cool down. You bind your feathers on
So you
freehand.
just paint it on.
Paint it on, yep.
No feathers.
Or you can dip it, no feathers. You just got a shaft with the glue on it,
Yeah.
glue compound. You bind your feathers on and then you reheat it over charcoal fire. And it melts over the bindings and it melts underneath the feather and over the base
So
of
just
the
let
feather.
it sweat in there, really.
And it's just rock solid. I mean, it's not going to go anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. A sunny day on your dashboard?
No, not really. Not unless it's properly warm.
Yeah. Well, I suppose the fat has probably got, when it's fresh, it's going to be more liquidy.
Yep.
But actually, I don't really know what the words are, but it will have volatiles in it that will harden off over time. That
Yeah.
they'll evaporate and leave the hard
Yeah,
residue.
and what we're finding, which is quite interesting now, is that where you get the fat from on the animal changes that chemical compound. So what you can't use is tallow, because beef tallow mixed with beeswax gives you a wet, soft. They used it for candles.
Might be because it's sort of been boiled away. Because I know that collagen, animal glues and things like that.
Yep.
If you boil them up, I think it's over about 70 centigrade, 65, something like that. But you get them hot, and then they lose whatever collagen properties there are. Sorry, I'm not scientist enough to know, but they become weaker if you get them too hot.
There you go then. So you're losing that. The one thing you want from it, you've already lost at that point.
Yeah.
But what I found is if you get the hard fat from around the kidney and you render it gently and mix that with beeswax, then you get that plastic epoxy almost. It's magic
Butcher
stuff.
must love you. There you go. Arrow shafts.
Arrow shafts is not a simple thing.
No. Right, well, that's in our hand. Should we start with that?
Okay, so you're holding the Type 6 or the H1 hunting arrowhead, which may be the most widely misconceived head
Yeah.
you can get.
So I'm going to give you my reenactment spiel, and then I'm going to give you somebody else's reenactment spiel, and then probably somebody else's. So the problem with reenactment is what you're trying to do is you're trying to entertain a crowd. You're trying to get some information across, and it's great if you can get enough information in there that makes them interested and excited and everything else. That's kind of what we're trying to do. But the temptation is always to put in the really good bits, which may or may not be true.
Yep.
But the thing is, they're crowd pleasers, and that's the difficulty. And I spent 15 years quite happily recounting all the crowd pleasers, and some of it has probably got some truth in it somewhere. A lot of it won't have. I don't do that anymore. So
You can blame the Victorians for most of it.
yeah, I blame the Victorians for a lot of things. So I'd heard a lot of things about this head, and one of the very few things that I know personally to be true is that when this hits grass, it doesn't dig in like a regular arrow. So if you take an arrow like this one here, which is like an M3, okay, we're going to come back to that in due course, but it's an M3. That arrow there's like a dividing line when you're shooting on grass, that you've got the leaves and the roots, and then you've got the soil.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen is this will come in, especially if you're shooting at close range. So if you're shooting long, the arrow comes down like that, no problem. You're shooting at close range, it's coming in quite flat, quite fast. And it comes down, it goes through the grass, and then it sort of hits the soil layer, and it bounces off the soil layer. This is all I can say it's doing, really. But it bounces off the soil layer, but then the grass holds it, and it just skids between the two.
Yep.
And arrows like this will just get themselves right under the grass, so you cannot see them at all. And then the easiest way to find them, to be honest, is you take your shoes off and you walk barefoot up and down doing the sad shuffle. But this one here stays on the surface. It just hits, lands, and it'll either flop down or it'll just land and sort of poke up and do that kind of thing. Really easy to find. My gut feeling is that wasn't sort of a medieval thing. Maybe it would have been. I don't know. I don't know.
They'll have noticed it, and they'll have gone,
Yeah,
that's handy.
I suppose they will have noticed it. Yeah, that is true. So I didn't used to know what these were for, and I'd heard they were for cutting ropes on ships. But again, you don't even have to try it, and I haven't tried it. But first of all, arrows spin. And so unless this actually happens, spin in flight, actually happens to engage on the rope at the right possible moment, it's not going to do anything. Ropes on ships, they're tarred. That gives them really quite hard, tough outside. They're dense. They're very often under a lot of tension, which is a good benefit in the sense that the tension you can cut them, but also it means that they're dense.
Yep.
And this thing hitting wet, tarry, dense rope with its not very much energy, it's just not going to do
Why would you
anything.
bother?
And why would you bother?
Why would you bother?
One in 1,000 shots. Might.
Yeah.
They've said about ripping holes in sails. Well,
It
yeah,
will. It will.
But
Is that what they were designed for?
yeah, you're going to get an awful lot of shot in there as well, and all sorts of things. Bigger holes than arrows cause. Anyway, those are the kind of versions I've heard. Another one I hear is cutting the tendons.
Yep, on the back of horses' legs.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Cutting tendons on legs. That again comes to A, you have to be a phenomenal shot. B, it wants to stand there and let you shoot it. but the other is that it is still spinning again, so it has to hit the right orientation. All of them just...
I've heard a really good one.
Oh, yeah?
They used to tie bags of poison between the points.
Oh, okay.
That's a great one.
Not heard that, actually. That's nice. Poison arrow, which they didn't do in Europe. If you read Payne Galway, the crossbow man, he says, and I don't know the truth of this, the only source I got it from, but he says that the Spanish were still using poison crossbow bolts, 15th, 16th century, but not for warfare, for hunting.
Right.
I've got no idea. But what we do know, and this is what we definitely do know, is that there are cultures all over the planet, all over time periods, that use those heads. So talk us through it.
Well, you can find flint versions of these and stone versions of these.
So going back thousands, tens of thousands of years.
Prehistoric arrowheads weren't being shot at ships.
No,
they weren't being shot at ropes.
No,
they weren't trying to cut horses' tendons, and they weren't used for tying bags of poison between them or anything insane.
But you can't say that for a fact.
That's true. That's a good point. All
right, I'm pulling you out there, Will.
What we do know is that when they were making flint and stone arrowheads, they were hunting.
Yeah.
Of course they were. So they're hunting arrowheads. They weren't trying to go through armour and do weird things. They weren't going against mail or plate or whatever it is that we're talking about, or ships or horses or whatever. They were trying to eat to survive. So that is the earliest version of a dedicated hunting arrowhead we can find.
Yeah. So you get them in stone.
Yep.
You get them in bronze. You get them in steel. You get them in bone.
Yep.
You get them from South America to the Arctic to China and everywhere in between. Don't actually know, we talked about it earlier, we don't actually know about sort of Polynesia and Australasia, but I bet they did. But basically, thousands of years, thousands of miles, essentially the same form of arrowhead.
Yep.
And it's always in the context, and they still use them in Africa now, modern day, hunting birds.
Yep.
That's it. You see...
That's it.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, that's it. That's it. No, but you will see them also on Gaston Phoebus.
Yep.
So Gaston Phoebus wrote and illustrated fantastic hunting manuals from around late 14th century, early 15th century. There are pictures in there of crossbow heads like this. I can't actually, unfortunately, remember what they were hunting with them off the top of my head. So I don't know. But I suppose what you can say is there are plenty of other heads which will give you better penetration than that.
Yeah.
So whatever it is doing, penetration is not it, because they would have chosen other things.
My understanding is that because it's spinning, it grabs whatever, the fur or the feathers that it's being shot against, and it takes it out kind of almost with force rather than penetration, and the meat that you're going to eat is left alone, and the fur and the feathers have been taken out. Yeah. So the animal's going to be moved by it, or killed by it, or stunned by it, but the meat that you want to preserve is unfazed by that,
Which actually would... we missed off the last tiny bit. I don't think it matters very much. No, let's pick it up and carry on, because otherwise we might miss something. Okay. Yeah, I suppose...
Some were sharpened in the middle, some aren't.
Yeah. But I suppose it means that they don't necessarily need to be. All they're doing is just puckering something up in front of them.
Yeah, and I guess when it's spinning, you're actually left with like a wide round... which then digs and twists.
Well, there's an awful lot of controversy in archery.
Is there?
There is, yes, there is.
I wasn't aware of it.
Peculiarly English, it appears. People get very hot under the collar about stuff. I would say that arrows do spin, but have you seen that film I did where do they drill their way into the target?
Yep.
So what I did was I put coloured tape on an arrow, shot it, filmed it in slow-mo, and I can't remember now, but it's something like one rotation every 2 metres, something like that.
Okay.
Is what I was getting. So, although, of course, as the arrow comes in and it decelerates, it's still got the rotation on it. But I think not
enough to keep going.
Not enough. Because another thing to think about, if you take something like this big swallowtail here, is if you've got all of this, which weighs, let's say, 30-odd grams, and is spinning super fast.
Yep.
That stops now. It's going to stop. That's not going to drill into anything. That's going to stop in the target immediately.
Yep.
Their ability to glue steel to wood is not great. So the adhesive is not that strong.
Yep.
And these things would just disconnect every single time if
they're
they
normally
were
pinned.
spinning
Don't
too
forget
much.
that they're pinned.
The biggies were pinned,
Yeah.
but the same is true for... not that one. Let's say a Type 16. That's not going to spin into target.
Yep.
You can shoot that into a straw boss, it's not doing any spinning once that starts to go in,
Yeah.
but the things do not disconnect.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a good point.
So I think the whole concept of the spinning and drilling its way in is it's a lovely idea.
Unlikely, yeah.
But I think it's basically not that functionality. I think it's just not there.
I mean, what I know about arrows in terms of basic physics is that the reason they spin, if you look at one with a great big,
Yeah, you see it on this
as you
one.
can see it, the rifling is natural, isn't it?
Yeah. Very good point from Will there, actually. So in modern terms, what you can do is you can fletch your arrows helically so that the fletchings cross the shaft at an angle, and that induces a lot of spin.
But even if you don't, they will, because they all come from the same wing of
Yes.
the bird, and they've got a natural curve to them,
Yeah.
and that will also make rotation.
So what Will's saying there is if you look at these feathers, they come off a bird's wing, and that's how they come. Nobody's done anything to them. There's a slight curvature to it. That induces spin in this arrow naturally. You do not have to do what we do in modern terms of helically put the fletchings on. It's just not needed. They spin.
Yeah.
In fact, they can't not spin because all the feathers have it.
Yeah.
Right. Have we done that one to death?
I think we've done that one. Yeah.
Actually, sorry, the last reenactment story that I heard was, which is also untrue, is that this was called a clatterer.
A clatterer.
Best said in a Scots accent.
I won't do
He
it.
was Scottish. And what you do is you shoot this into a bush to alarm the birds, and then you knock your second arrow and shoot the birds that you frightened out of the bush.
Beautiful.
Like clay pigeon shooting, but very quick, one
Very
would
quick.
assume.
Yeah.
Probably not that. Right.
But we don't know.
But we don't know. We don't know. Right. Pick one, anyone,
What's
I
next?
don't know.
Well, we're talking about hunting, aren't we?
Yeah.
Let's talk about that one.
Okay, cool.
So this is, we call it a blunt. We've got no idea what they were called back then. We've got no record of them
Arrow,
being
innit,
found.
mate?
Arrow, yeah.
Bring an arrow.
Non-military arrow. That was made by a friend of mine, Phil Gregson. He's a master wheelwright, and he made this on a pole lathe at Chalk Valley, actually,
All
in
right,
the
cool.
field, based on the Luttrell Salter image.
Yeah.
So that's 14-something, isn't it? Early 1400s.
I'm going to say late 13s, but
Okay, yeah,
ignorance.
somewhere
sorry.
around there.
So Luttrell Salter is a prayer book, I think it was, is what Salter is, but it's a prayer book, but it's fantastically illustrated of daily scenes of life, you know, kind of like slightly posh people mostly, but what Will's referring to is a fantastic picture in there where somebody's shooting at the butts. So they're formally shooting at practice, and there is an elevated target. You know, that's what people are doing. They're not just hunting, they're not war, they're practicing, they're playing around.
Yep.
And yeah, I'm thinking of their clothes. It's got to be 14th century.
Yeah.
And he's shooting a bow, and with it is
Well, it's
an
this
arrow.
arrow. It's exactly
that
this arrow. So it's
with a
got,
bulbous knock on it.
yeah, rounded fletchings
Oh, are they?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, okay.
and this blunt.
Which is kind of interesting because he's also shooting at a target, and he's shooting an arrow at a target that can't possibly stick into the target.
Well, if you shoot at wet mud, these do go in and they stand where they are.
Look to me like it's got a cloth over it. But
Okay.
yes, okay, that is true. Although, as a slight aside, there's a fantastic woodcut, 16th century woodcut, I think. And it's a German crossbow tournament. And they used to love this. Sort of towns would hold their crossbow competitions where they go target shooting. And it's the men at the butts, nice men to do, well-to-do men, these wooden targets that they're shooting at, shooting blunt, really big, heavy, blunt crown bolts off their crossbows. And there's a dog which has been trained to fetch them. So there's a dog running back with a bolt in its mouth, which I just
So they can't be
absolutely
sticking in then, can they?
Absolutely not sticking in, no.
Good.
Those ones, but that's a different beast. You know. Anyway, back to this.
So yeah, I mean, we don't know a lot about them really, do we? We haven't found any because they're made of wood, so they tend to disintegrate, unlike iron
Yeah.
or steel heads.
Yes, but I would have thought we'd find some,
Yeah,
possibly misidentified to be fair.
I think we have found many in Scandinavia,
Oh, really?
and a lot of them are built into the arrow as one piece. So they come out with this great big head.
That, to me, is what the Luttrell Salter one looks like.
Right. Yeah, it may not be a separate head.
It doesn't look it to me.
And there are some on
What
the
a way
Mary
to make
Rose,
an arrow.
aren't
That must be
there?
a pig.
Because you've got to break all of that down.
Yeah, horrible way to make an arrow.
Yeah, I wouldn't fancy that. Don't order any, please.
No.
The Mary Rose has some short crossbow bolts with great big wide
Yeah.
blunt heads, so perhaps. There's a lot of theories out there. Some of them are really great about why they were being used and how often they were being used. Some people think they were putting these over an iron head to turn a normal arrow into a practice arrow.
Yeah.
Not a fan of that idea, really.
That doesn't work for me.
Um,
So what is interesting is there were statutes under English law that all men had to shoot every Sunday, every holy day, at the butts. So every town and village had an archery range, a place where you can shoot. And men were compelled to do so for 150, 200 years. And I think the law was still current, but it's going to slack off, you know, how things go. But for, let's just say, conservatively, 100 years, men turned up and shot week after week, day after day, arrow after arrow. You lose them.
Yep.
The heads break off. You hit a stone. You get drunk. They fall in a ditch. Archery butts in England should be riddled with arrowheads.
Yep.
A lot will rust away. This, that, and the other. A lot will remain, even if they're just sort of like nasty little mineral lumps. And they don't seem to be there.
Yeah.
And it was a guy called Mark Wheatley, I know him as Pud, Reenactment name, I guess. And he put me onto this. Now, I don't know the truth of this. I'm just repeating what I was told. But Mark was saying that arrowheads are basically, iron arrowheads are basically not found at butts in England.
Yeah.
You know, you can go there with a metal detector, you basically don't find them.
You find them in canals normally. They're normally river and canal dredges is where you get most arrowheads.
Okay. Well, I mean, good preservative in that sense, river mud. But
Yeah.
but there would be some boggy butts, and there would, you know.
Yeah.
So the thing is, if you're basically not finding them, they basically weren't used or not used in large numbers. That has to be the assumption. And again, if you go look on eBay,
There should be
eBay
hundreds,
England,
yeah.
there should be billions of arrowheads for sale because people, metal detectorists will be pulling them up all the time. And there are some, but they're not in the quantity you would expect.
And they're
So-
normally military heads, aren't they?
I don't know.
I mean, they're almost always either a Type 9
Yeah.
type head or they're a barbed head. You don't see practice heads like a Type 5 bullet point.
Right.
We know they had them.
Yeah.
We can't find any where you'd expect to find them
Yeah.
in the numbers that they should have been using.
Yeah. So it seems to be that you find arrowheads in canals and rivers, battlefields, that sort of thing, but not in the domestic butts. So that leads to the question of, were they using them? You know, when you went and did your practice after the church, were they using steel heads?
Yeah.
And there's a very strong argument in that. It's sort of an argument of absence rather than evidence.
Yep.
So it's kind of the wrong way round. But if they're not there, they were using someone else. And if they're using someone else, maybe it's like it's shown in the lateral psalter and it's wooden blunts.
Yep.
Because there are some things that we know is true, that you've got, you know, the bodger in the woods who's making his little wooden components. He can be turning these out from almost free material.
Yep.
Doesn't take very long to make them. It might look very big and bulbous, but
Yeah,
you
they
were
fly
saying...
very well. Yeah, we compared that to a Type 16 shot from the same bow. They went pretty much the same distance.
Yeah.
Maybe 6 foot different.
Right. So they kind of go the same. So even if you're doing distance shooting or you're doing close-up target shooting, whatever, they work just fine.
Yep.
They cost less. They don't dig in and hide under the grass.
Yep.
They lie on the surface because of their nature. Why not use them? Why not use them? So, I mean, that's pretty scanty evidence, I've got to admit. But it is a hypothesis that I really like because there's a lot of things in it
That makes sense, yeah.
that make sense.
One thing to note there, which is interesting, is that the theory's wonderful and it works in my head. But what we do know from Jonathan Davis' recent research is from 1500 onwards, I've got no idea about previous.
Jonathan Davis, I think he's an amateur historian, really, but if you come across his work, he's a lovely bloke and he is so thorough, such good work. Really check it out.
Yeah, he's doing a full rundown at the moment of coroner's reports from the 1500s onwards.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of archery-related accidents while practicing, so in competition, and they're all barbed metal heads.
Or most.
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 Yeah, most. They're all metal heads,
Yeah.
but most of them are barbed. So that tells us that, for a fact, that from 1500s onwards, no idea about before, some people were practicing at the butts with metal barbed, which is really weird to shoot into a straw
I find
target.
that really weird.
But that's what they're using, because the reason he's found them is because the coroners are complaining about how hard it is to pull the arrowheads out because they're barbed.
Leads me to two good points. You got feather?
Literally.
You got any feather?
I've got feathers around here.
With a quill,
Yep.
tips cut off?
I can cut the tips off.
Could you get me a pair?
Yep.
Bro. So what Will is alluding to is a barbed head, one like that. Why would you practice with it? Because the thing is, you might go, well, it's the only arrowhead I got. But the problem is, if I make a crossbow bolt with heads like this on it, obviously I want to test it. So if I shoot this at a straw target, I will not get it out. I just can't. So what I do is I just stack up loads of layers of hardboard and cardboard together, just make a big fat stack like this. And I shoot it into that and I go, yeah, lovely, it shoots well. But then you have to take the whole thing apart and cut it out layer by layer until you get it out. So why anybody was using these, I have absolutely no idea. Well, for practice. Anyway, military use, obviously. But brings me on to the subject, thank you very much, Will, is, I forget his name now, but basically there was a Belgian surgeon, I think from around the year 1300, who wrote a little snippet about how to remove barbed arrowheads. Have you come across that?
You told me about him, yeah.
Oh, yeah. So, I forget his name, but look it up. So basically, arrowhead goes in. Obviously, the idea is it catches on your skin. You can't get it out. That's the absolute point. So again, reenactorisms is, you push it through, or you cut around it and you pull it out. And it's like, well, maybe. Or this Belgian surgeon said what you do is you just poke around in the wound with a couple of feathers until you can fit them on the barbs, like that. So now they're on the barbs, and you can now just pull the arrow from the wound without a problem. So simple, such genius.
Yeah, that's perfect, isn't it?
It really is. And I'd prefer that, I can tell you now, for being pushed through my leg. Anyway, there you go. So the last thing, anyway, about these, I suppose, is hunting context.
Yep.
Because, again, I don't know if we really use blunt arrowheads anymore for hunting, do we?
I think in Scandinavia they might be.
Really?
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, it seems that they did back in medieval times. So, this packs quite a lot of energy. So to give you an idea, when you shoot this off a big heavy bow, it will give between 100 and 125 joules, something like that. That is plenty enough energy to cave in the side of a rabbit or a bird or something like that. So you can't use this on big game, I'm guessing sort of foxes or anything bigger than that, it's just not going to do it. But small game...
Yeah, there's no chance, is there?
Yeah, this will break things and stop them running away. The other thing about it, of course, is if you shoot a pointed arrow, let's say you're hunting some pigeons up in a tree, you shoot a pointed arrow at the pigeon, miss a pigeon, well, if it misses the tree, you've lost your arrow because it's now 200 yards over there in the woodland. If you hit the tree, it now sticks up and it's now 20 yards up there stuck in a branch. This one will land on the surface of the 200 metres away, and even if you lose it, at least that way, it's a lower cost than that. If it hits a branch, it bounces back out of the tree again. So there's lots of reasons you'd want to use them. But it still really leaves to me the domestic idea.
Yeah, I mean, we just don't know.
No. So while we're on that subject, what do you think about those grooves in front of the church of where they sharpen their arrows?
That's rubbish.
Because I nearly...
Because,
sorry for the bad English. I nearly videoed a little bit that I caught. It was a news report 2-3 months ago where there was a drought somewhere in, I'm going to say it was South America, and it had... the river levels had dropped, and it left some stone carvings that they hadn't previously seen, like 800-year-old stone carvings of faces or something like that. And there were, next to them, some grooves in the rock that were obviously man-made, and I quote, probably for sharpening their arrowheads.
Beautiful.
It's like,
Beautiful.
No. So.
Nope.
Nope.
What are they normally made out of, those stones? They're sandstone, aren't they? Or
yeah, some are pretty soft.
You can't sharpen metal.
Well, it depends on where the church is built.
I suppose so, yeah. I don't think you can sharpen it.
No, I mean, as a knife maker, because that's what I do, obviously, you probably know that, you've got a deep, shallow hollow. You'll see them all over. Search on the web if you're not from the UK, but, sharpening arrows in English churches, you'll get a million pictures. And the idea is that people went to church, and if it was raining a bit, or they're just hanging around gossiping before they go down to do their duty shooting at the archery butts, they sharpen their arrowheads while they're chatting to the mates. So A, you're going for practice. Why
Yep.
sharpen your heads?
Yep.
B, have you got any heads on your arrows at all? C, sharpen it on a flat stone, for goodness sake. Like the one that you're at home with, that you use to sharpen your
All of
knife
your-
and everything else that you own. It is so Victorian.
It's very Victorian.
It's so
yeah.
Victorian. You can imagine these guys in their top hats going, what do you think these are all about? It's like, well, I know, because I know something about archery, I know they sharpen their heads there.
They find them inside churches as well,
Oh, really?
behind pillars, where people have been bored doing something.
Yeah.
You can't take them into churches, you
Yeah.
aren't allowed. So
Yeah.
you've got your quiver of arrows for your practice. No one's going to be taking them out and then rubbing them on a stone wall
No.
during a service.
So I can also tell you, for a fact, I'm more responsible now. But when I was a kid, I can imagine, it's like, okay, I've got another 4-hour church service every Sunday. Not really that interested in Latin, can't understand it. How deep can I make this hole over the next year? I'll give you a competition, Bob. I bet I can make it deeper than your hole. It's just like, it's
all
got,
human, aren't we?
you know it's going to be something like that. Right, blimey. We've done 2. Well,
We've done 2. We're getting there.
goodness me. You better be into arrows.
I am. What's next?
You ought to be into arrows. I know, pick one, I don't care.
Bodkins.
Bodkins, pair of them. Let's do them
bodkins.
together, yeah?
So we've got 2 here. We've got the...
Hang on, I'm going to leap into
close-up.
action. Yeah, this is my technique. Right. Type 7, needle bodkin on the right-hand side. Type 9, short bodkin on the left-hand side. Bodkin means needle. It's as simple as that.
Any 4-sided point. We've got
Well,
2.
Not in the context of sewing. Sewing bodkins?
Aren't they square-pointed bodkins?
No.
They've got needles and bodkins. Oh, I might be
Oh,
wrong.
hang
I
on,
might
then.
be wrong.
Why is that a needle bodkin? Because that's a round
They wouldn't
square.
have called it a needle
And it's not
bodkin.
even square. It's diamond.
Okay, all right.
Right. Anyway, leather sewing needles and canvas sewing needles. Helicopter, sorry. Leather sewing and canvas sewing needles are traditionally triangular. I don't know what they were in the medieval period, but they are nowadays anyway. Right, anyway, bodkins, needle, whatever. Maybe
Yeah.
I'm wrong, who cares? Oh, okay. Anyway.
I've actually got 3 here to show now.
All right.
That one, if you want to do a close-up on that one, is one of the earliest ones that we're aware of.
Oh.
So that is square in section.
So this was the Waterford.
That's the Waterford arrow, yeah.
So
One
that
of 2.
is... Did we show this in this film?
No, not yet.
Not yet?
Not yet.
Oh, we'll show you anyway. So this was... Well, tell us while we're holding it.
So this was found dating to 1170, the Siege of Waterford. And you can
Which is
see-
Ireland.
Which is Ireland, yeah. Anglo-Norman Siege of Waterford.
Check out the difference in size.
Now, it looks like a pretend toy arrow, but that's a complete arrow that's been found that can be measured
With a military head.
with a military head, yeah. There is no question what that arrow was being used for, or how long it was, or
Well, actually-
how much it weighs, etc.
Okay, I'm going to question it. The context says it was military.
Yep,
A square-sided bodkin, because it's a square,
Yep.
a square-sided bodkin is actually a pretty easy head to make.
Yep.
So why couldn't that have just been a practice head, give it to your noble child head?
it could have been, but it was found in the context of the siege.
Right,
So the stratigraphy works for the Siege of Waterford,
yeah.
and it's by the castle wall where other weapons were found.
So it'd be a pretty coincidental
Yeah.
find if it were not the case.
Yep.
Okay, all right, that'll do.
So we'll assume it's a military
Yep.
arrow. Tiny 4mm knock,
Yeah, micro.
tiny. Short fletchings,
And not medieval shape. Sort of square cut or whatever you call
Yeah.
it. Look at the knock on that. It's a bulbous knock, so it's not like the later medieval ones. But that distance there where it's thread bound, it's about 4mm. I mean, it's just
yeah, it's
micro.
tiny.
So what sort of... 'Cause it's short, so the spinage, the stiffness is
The dynamic
up
spine
more.
Yeah.
What kind of weight bow do you think that was off?
60, 70, easily.
Yeah?
Yeah, you can shoot that out of a 70-pound bow if you're shooting at 20 inches. That's fine, yeah.
But what I found fascinating about this is I filmed another film with Will this morning, actually, which was the main reason for coming. Although we are enjoying this one very
We are,
much,
yeah.
actually. So, just as a slight aside, I hope you're enjoying it. It's going to be long. This is like a whole series of films. It's going to be long. But the point is, we're not constrained by YouTube on this timing.
No,
So we
we're
are
just
just
going,
chatting and loving it. But what Will was saying this morning, because that is so short, is that was a chest draw.
Yeah.
So they would shoot like this, which is so alien to everything I know.
Maybe a pinch draw, which gives you a slightly more comfortable. So if you're, it's still across your body, but it's to here, not right back behind. Yeah. So chest length.
That is so
bizarre, isn't it?
not for me.
And until you put a bow in the hands of a child, and you haven't taught him how archery is meant to look, and they go up.
Yeah, they always do.
Yeah.
Very good point. Yeah, I don't know if any of you taught archery, but if you give a bow to a kid, Will's completely right. They never do that.
No.
They always do that.
Yep. Now, we know of archery today because of warbow documentaries and whatever it is. That that's how you shoot a heavy bow. But there's no reason why it would have been when they're not trying to send a 30-inch arrow through armour a long way away. It's a different game.
That will do plenty against flesh.
Yeah.
And if you assume in 12th century Ireland, there's going to be mail. There's going to, let's not be ignorant and say they had nothing in their savages. But there will be less armour around.
But definitely male.
Than there would be in Western Europe.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm just making a gross assumption there as well. Sorry, any Irish people I've horribly offended. I think. So,
but we don't know.
but we don't. Somebody does.
We don't know.
Okay, but this you were saying is different because it's square forged.
Yeah.
Yeah?
So that will go through mail. That's not a problem at all.
No, all arrows go through mail.
All arrows go through mail. When you start making it more diamond, like the later medieval heads.
Don't know if you can see the difference. So this one, well, you can probably see it because of the different size as I spin it.
They're a lot flatter than people realise, those.
So yeah, it's a flattened diamond section. So I suppose it's like a stabbing dagger, really.
Yep.
Whereas this one here, the Waterford one, is actually square, which, I mean, it's easier to forge, but I'm guessing not really a lot easier. I suppose it makes a lot of difference.
Just one more process at the end, yeah.
Yeah.
But the flattened diamond is far more efficient because you've got a smaller frontal area, so it goes through better than a square section. So if you're going to start going into low quality plate or thin plate, these are going to be more effective than a square one.
Yeah. All right. I mean, there was a bit of leather armour around. It's not like Hollywood, it wasn't everywhere, and it would invariably must have been either rawhide or hardened were it out there. So they'd handled that quite well.
Oh, yeah.
Fabric armour, I know that needle bodkins, the Type 7s, penetrate fabric armour relatively well. I did, I'll put it in here, go check out the films I did on waxed arrowheads if you haven't seen them. But that was a really interesting little thing. I'd like your take on it. But so what happened, I'll tell you what happened, was I was doing shooting needle bodkins at a Gambeson sample, and I'd messed up the take or something like that. So I shot it, I went straight to the Gambeson because it hadn't gone in very far, it had gone in 8 centimetres or something, I don't know. I went straight to the Gambeson, I pulled it out, and the fabric on the Gambeson was polished. And polished, you could see through sort of pressure, and it looked to me like heat. It's the sort of stuff I get geekily interested in. Pulled the head out, and you could feel the heat in the head. And of course you can feel the heat, because what it's done is it's expended all the energy, decelerating in that very short period. So it had a whole bundle of energy, and it's just given it up in one short little patch, bam, heat. And I just went, wonder what happens if you wax that. Went back, wiped some beeswax on it, boom, twice as far through. And I just went, now that is interesting. Now the thing is, yeah, great, I'm a bloke in a shed, little experiment, wonderful, it works. No evidence for it at all that they did it. But archers were very often other tradespeople. Sailmakers use it, carpenters use it when they wax their nails. They both wax the implements when they're using them. They would know that it would go through easier, harder, faster.
Yep.
They'd know it. And there's also the 1530s, I think. There is an angry letter exchange between a guy, I think in Calais, who's been given the job of cleaning 3,500 arrows that come back off campaign.
Okay. And
he's really angry because he's been given them and they're rusty and they're dirty, and as any fool knows, unpolished items don't penetrate as deeply, or words to that effect.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. So anyway, that's my side. What do you think on the whole sort of waxed arrowhead thing?
I mean...
and it's a standard way for blacksmiths to preserve their goods. They get them to a certain temperature, wipe them over with beeswax, or, as they cool down, wipe them over with beeswax, and you have a hardened off, basically rust-proof covering.
I mean, it's the same with everything. You can go, this makes sense from my modern perspective, therefore they must have done it
Yeah.
But if we haven't got evidence
Always
of
a big
it,
hole.
Yeah. But if we haven't got evidence of it, we can't say that they did it.
No.
But to us, it makes perfect sense. But so do pockets, and they didn't have those either. I mean,
No.
like, it makes perfect sense to
Yep.
us. Why on earth didn't they do it? They must have done it, therefore we'll say they did it.
Yep.
But we don't know they did it,
Yep.
so we can't say that they did it.
No. And nor will I.
But they probably did.
My gut feeling is there's so many reasons that they would have done
And they were doing it in other walks of life as well.
that are quite paralleled.
Yeah. Yep.
The other thing is there is a archery manual, again, it's Arabic, and it is, I'm going to say, the 17th or possibly later even 18th century. And in that, it talks about waxing at arrowheads. But of course, 200 years different, 4,000 miles. But other cultures seem to know about it.
Yeah, I think we were well up there. We were using these weapons for thousands of years. We probably did it.
Yeah, I think so. Anyway.
But we don't know.
No, you'll hear that a lot.
So bodkins are... People think of that as a bodkin. I
Yep.
mean, on our Arrows versus Armour film, they said, why didn't you use bodkins?
Right. Yeah.
Because they were looking for these.
Yeah.
Because they're pointy and they're long and they go through things. That makes perfect sense.
They're
But-
more exciting looking, to be fair.
Yeah,
they're more arrow.
They're
aren't
more
they?
arrow, yeah, they're more Hollywood. But we did use bodkins on Arrows versus Armour.
If you can find it.
There it is. We used what ended up becoming the most standard bodkin of the medieval period, which is the Type 9 bodkin. So that's a development of this. It's
I'll
got...
show you again. There you go. Oh, that's an easy way. Don't have to get up. There
Nice.
you go. Oh, yeah, I'm lazy. Nice.
So it's still a four-sided cutting tool,
Yeah.
isn't it? It's still got a point.
The four-sided actually is quite important because if you try and put a round head through steel
Like a bullet.
or fabric, it has to stretch and rupture the material around the whole circumference. And that takes an awful lot more energy than cutting. So what these do, what the bodkin heads do, is that they put 4 cuts in. So they do work better if they're sharp. If there's a hard edge, it's not just kind of squarish.
Yep.
They cut the 4 corners and then they peel back the material on the other ones. And that seems to take less energy, more penetration.
And all you need is to cut it back to the widest part of the head,
Yeah.
which is short from the point, and then the arrow, which is narrower, has got a clear hole to go through. No?
No.
Okay.
So you're all familiar that when you bend steel, it bends out and it will always spring back to a certain extent. But actually when you...
Oh, that's good. I don't want to be wrong.
No, it's fine. No, fuck that. No, this is it. No, Will, this is good
Was that okay?
conversation. Yeah, it's brilliant.
I haven't lost anything.
Yeah, good. No, because the thing is, when an arrow passes through steel, you all know it, that the steel will bend out the way. It will always spring back to a certain extent, so it will always close in a little bit. But when you shoot fabric armour, and especially when you shoot shields, like a poplar shield, which is like a good 14th, 15th century shield wood, it expands out of the way, but then it comes right back in again.
Okay.
And so if we take a shaft like this tapers all the way from the front to the back.
Yep.
And it will go through, let's say, to about here on a shield, maybe a bit more. But I will have to absolutely ram it and pull it and push
Okay.
it maybe to about here before it starts to free up. And what I can't do, even though it's gone in the hole, I cannot pull the arrow out the way it's gone in.
Right.
Can't do it. It just closes up on it.
Okay.
Sorry to pull you up on that.
no, every day's a school day.
Well, hell, you've taught me so much today.
That's cool.
No, it is. It's great. Absolutely great.
So yeah, there's your late medieval, so 1300s onwards, Cressy, Agincourt, that classic. That's what they would have been using. And
So-
again, diamond in section, not
Yeah.
square.
Yeah, you see, I find that odd. I don't see particularly why a diamond works better than square.
It gives you a smaller frontal area. It's got less to do in terms of physics.
Is it?
Yeah, you can do the calculations on it. It's
No, I can't, actually. I really can't.
Somebody can.
Somebody else can.
Yeah, it's a more efficient cutting tool than
Okay.
a square one.
All right.
The frontal area itself is smaller, so it cuts better. What's interesting is that European heads, bodkins, I mean the French had longbows, Italians had longbows,
Yeah.
and crossbows. They were normally square section. The English ones typically are diamond in section. So that was a development that we made
Weird.
that didn't carry through, yeah.
And the Looking at the two differences between these, I'll show you again. So we've got a needle and a short. I'm enjoying my sitting down here. So we've got a needle and a short Bodkin there. And you shoot the needle at something hard like plate.
Yep.
And it curls up.
Like a pig's tail.
Like a pig's tail. There you go. And so that will not penetrate plate. It seems that they had some which were of steel. I think we found a few.
Yeah,
which were
David
steel.
Starley found one that was of
only
steel.
one?
Yep.
But when you say it's steel, that's all great. But what quality of steel and what heat treatment has been done to it, I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, what's really interesting is that he did find, when he analysed a whole bunch of these heads, that some of them were made of steel, but they still weren't hardened.
No, but they will still give you something tougher than iron.
It will.
It's still a better material.
Yeah,
for
there's more
it
carbon in there, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
But they weren't using it to their full advantage.
No. And they, don't think they didn't know how.
Oh,
they
no, because some of them
did know
were.
how.
Some of them were hardened.
Yeah.
Especially the Type 16s were hardened steel.
No, they absolutely knew what they were doing with iron and steel, but they were choosing to not bother or whatever,
Well, we've done tests, haven't we? And we found it doesn't make a huge amount of difference anyway, whether you do or not.
No, which is an interesting point. So, and then just finish off on that before we come to that interesting point, is the Type 9s, the short Bodkin, is fundamentally stouter. And the idea there is that when that strikes on steel, something hard, the idea is that it doesn't curl up like a pig's tail, and it stands some sort of chance to go through. So we're going to just scan through the other armours quickly, and then we're going to come back to plate, because Will's brought up something very interesting. Chainmail, mail, is on its own, of a kind of normal quality. It comes in all sorts of qualities, but of a kind of normal quality, is basically not resistant to arrows at all. They're just any kind of arrow you want to pick up and shoot, they'll go through the mail. A decent gambeson, a really good one, they are fantastically resistant against short bodkins. They will actually bounce off. Needle bodkins, they will go through a bit. If you wax them, they'll go through quite a lot more. If you take something like a Type 16, if it's kind of sharpish, we're getting off track here, that will go through a gambeson. If it's super sharp, then I've lost track. Forget I said anything about those. We're going to talk more about Type 16s later. I'm going to get back on track. Anyway, ignore all that. So, sorry, slightly unprofessional there. So you've got these two. So they'll go through mail, no problem at all. That won't go through gambeson. That will go through gambeson. That won't go through plate. That will sometimes go through plate. And if you start layering up materials, then it all gets very complicated. There's too many options to talk about. But they, of course, wore gambeson, mail, plate in combinations. And as we know now from modern armour, what you're looking for is composite armour. You're looking for different things with different properties, mixes of ceramics and steels and stuff like that. They knew that. They did exactly that. Plate. So here's the thing, right? Does it? Doesn't it?
We don't know.
All right. So what I would say, actually, is... God, I've got a lot of things what I would say is there is something in the historical record called a duckbill arrow.
Yep.
Duckbill head.
And duckbill jousting head as well.
Oh, really?
It doesn't just exist on arrows.
Okay.
Yeah.
We don't know what that was.
Probably
might have been that.
Yeah, I think it probably is.
Yeah.
That. When you look at the cross-section of
It kind of looks ducky.
It does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll give it that.
Yeah.
So that might have been what they're referring to, and that can be quite helpful looking through the records. A modern name for it, and I've fallen into the hole of therefore assuming, is plate cutter. So basically, we all think of that as the arrowhead that is used to try and defeat plate.
Yep.
We don't know that. Now, we did our Arrows versus Armour films as a trial for all of that.
Yep.
That's the head we used.
Yep.
And we perhaps should have been less prescriptive on it. And we will come back to look at other heads.
Yep.
But normal consensus is that is the anti-armour head.
I mean, the reason I chose that head for both of those films was that one head has been found...
I'm not putting any blame on you.
No,
it was a collective
I'm agreeing
decision.
with you entirely that we were like, this is exactly what we're going to use, therefore we used it. But my argument for that head being the choice was that one was found at Agincourt, of that shape, that was drawn by Woodford in 1818. So that head was found on the battlefield of Agincourt. if he was in the right place. And another head was found at Cressy, which is exactly that shape. And loads of them are in museums. They've turned up everywhere. They were a common military head.
Yeah.
So we chose that one. There are other common military heads. These are also common military heads. They may have been the ones that they chose. But we went for that one because it is a common military head. So they were using it in military context at the time we were looking at for the testing. So it made sense to go for that one.
At a time when there was lots of armour around.
Yeah.
So there's lots of reasons to use it. What is also curious, though, about it is, if we come back and poke these at camera again, needle bodkin, there are some steel ones. Short bodkin, to my knowledge, there is one steel one that we know of.
Yeah.
But then what becomes really curious is there is directive after directive stating that arrows must be made of steel and hard and whatever other words they use. Steel, steeled. And those directives span 150 years or something?
At least,
150 years, and the penalty for not delivering what they're asking for, making them for the tower, for the king, gets harsher and harsher and harsher. So there is an assumption there, if the penalty is getting harsher, it's because people aren't doing it. If they keep on issuing the laws, it's because people aren't doing it. Or they think it's so phenomenally important, but we haven't got them.
So that, I mean, this is the most interesting thing that I've come out of all of this stuff that we've done, is that word steeled.
Yeah.
And you must provide steeled arrowheads. But what's that?
Yeah.
It's an arrowhead, right?
Yeah.
That's an arrowhead.
Yeah.
That's an arrowhead. That's an arrowhead. These are all arrowheads.
Yeah.
Nowhere in the record is steeled bodkin,
Or
steeled
duckbill.
duckbill, steeled pike shaft, whatever they want to call it.
Yeah.
There is no relation between the two words.
Yeah.
All we know is that they wanted arrowheads made of steel.
Yeah.
Or steel.
So backtracking, there is a lot of documentation of requests and receipts for arrows where they list the word steel or steeled.
Yeah. Hardened at the tips with steel is even, written down explicitly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But also there are documents where they refer to both steel and steeled in the same document.
Yep.
Which leads you to conclude, reasonably I think, that they are two different things.
Yep.
Steel and steeled. So we can assume that steel is exactly what we imagine it to be, steel.
Yeah.
Does that mean the whole head is steel? Or just the tip is steel? Is the socket iron and the main head steel? Kind of don't know.
We don't
really
know. What we do know is from Starley's analysis of a very small sample size of these types of heads.
Yeah,
and
type 9s.
Type 9s and type 16s.
Oh, right.
Is that the majority of these...
Let's poke a 16 at camera. 16 is the barbed one there, yeah.
The majority of the 16 have an iron socket and steel barbs.
Yeah.
Some of them are hardened, some of them are not.
But steel.
But steel. High carbon content. The majority of the type 9 bodkins are iron.
Yeah.
I think one was made entirely of steel, but not hardened.
Yeah.
And all the rest were either phosphoric or ferritic iron, with no traces of carbon steel anywhere on them. So those heads, I would argue, are a arrowhead hardened and steeled at the points.
Yeah.
That's how I've made these. These are iron, these are steel.
Okay.
That's a different arrowhead, which is not steeled.
So we're just going to jump off this for a minute, because this leaves us with a big problem when we're talking about arrowheads. And it's something that Will and I know are very keen to come back and look at. The only arrowheads we have in quantity which have steel in them, existing heads, are these Type 16s. The Type 16s is exactly the arrowhead that you go, it's anti-flesh, or it's anti-gambeson. It's not anti-armour. This is never considered an anti-armour head, yet it is the only head which has steel in it.
Yep.
Now, you did propose, I think, which is a good argument for having steel, is that you can get a sharper edge on it. Sharper edge cuts through gambeson much better. There's a massive difference between a bluntish edge and a really sharp edge. Massive difference.
What about mail?
No difference. But, for instance, with things like bronze, you can make bronze hard enough to make a razor from.
Right.
So I think the argument that iron can't be sharpened enough for a one-time use, because that's all it is, that iron can't be sharp enough for a one-time use is a little flimsy. There is argument, I've done tests where you lay chainmail over gambeson or gambeson over chainmail, And there is an argument to blunt the heads, if the male is on the outside, to blunt the head as it penetrates the male, to then not be able to penetrate the gambeson. And it definitely shows a distinct difference. I would warrant that a steel head would still get blunted as it passes through the male. So, for me...
What's left?
Yeah.
Plate.
Exactly. That's my conundrum. The steel makes no sense in this kind of arrow unless the target is entirely something different to what we're considering.
Yeah, and when you look at the actual, the cross-section of what actually touches the armour first, these are the same. That looks completely different as an arrowhead, but it's still a diamond section, four-sided head.
Yeah.
That suddenly gets a lot wider very quickly.
It does.
But that deliverance point is a four-sided diamond section.
And I'm not good on the physics of this, but I would guess that an initial penetration and initiation of a tear is really important to the further penetration of the arrow.
We found that with the case-hardened heads on that plate testing. They bit more.
Yeah.
They weren't going in.
Actually, that's something we completely... Yeah.
A case-hardened.
Brilliant, case-hardening steel. Yeah. Right, so we know what a steel head is. Steel. But they talk about steeled, and we don't know what that is. Our collective guess?
Case-hardened.
Case-hardened.
I mean, an interesting historical reference is arrowhead should be well boiled and braised.
Yeah.
Now, braising is a process of joining two together. What's boiling?
Yeah.
Is that going into a quench, where it looks like the water's boiling? Or is it leaving it in a roasting hot charcoal fire, where you're boiling the steel, which we know from testing, and papers have been done, with iron, that makes it harder.
Yeah.
That brings enough carbon from the charcoal into that piece of iron to give a distinct and considerable difference in hardness.
Yeah.
Is that how you boil an arrowhead? There's no point putting it in boiling water, is there?
No, that wouldn't do anything.
It's going into
that
something
would actually
boiling.
do the reverse, it temper it. So case hardening you might consider to be a modern process. It really isn't, actually. Case hardening is something they have known about and did on files, for instance, which were day-to-day things way back into the Roman times. You know? So, and probably before. So case hardening is something they're absolutely aware of, can do, is totally suited to mass production. So there's a really good set of arguments why you would do it on arrowheads, if it made any difference.
If it made any difference.
And again, what we found on arrows versus armour is it absolutely did make a difference. You could see the difference in the strike from a case hardened to a non-case hardened. But ultimately, the result was the same, which is that they basically didn't go through armour.
Yeah. But they bit more.
A bit more.
And they made a slightly deeper dent. But
yeah. I mean...
It's a lot of effort to go to.
It's a lot of effort. So my take on that is marginal gains. So if you throw 1,000 arrows at somebody, whereas before 998 bounce off, or 999 bounce off and one goes through, now you might turn that to 996 bounce off and 4 go through. So it's not going to set the world on fire, the difference. But logically, if it does penetrate, as we saw, perhaps that little bit more, there will be an effect. But it wasn't big.
No. There wasn't an obvious reason as to why you would do it.
No. It wasn't a jaw-dropping, oh my goodness, like it was when I put wax on the arrowhead.
Yeah.
That was jaw-dropping. Case hardening wasn't.
No. Against flat or against curved. There wasn't enough of an obvious difference, was there?
No. No, there wasn't. Blimey, we've done enough of that.
Yeah.
Really? I'm sure we can find something else.
Probably.
Right, okay.
So that's Bodkins.
Oh, yeah. Bodkins.
They're short and pointy. This isn't helping.
No, I'm sure it's not.
In my arse the last 5 minutes.
I'm still offended that you gave me a dog blanket, for fuck's sake.
That's good for me. You should be honoured. Normally the dog gets that. He's far more important than human beings.
Right. Hunting broadhead?
Yeah.
All right. Cool.
Okay, so...
Hunting head, what type?
So this is a type 15. And it's a type 15 because the barbs are longer than the socket.
Oh, right.
A type 14, the barbs end at the same length as the socket.
Nothing like being precise. So to give you a context of size, there you go. That's what we got.
They do come in multiple sizes. There are much bigger ones and much smaller ones.
So this is domestic,
This is
not
for
military.
hunting,
So
I mean,
this is hunting.
What we don't know, which is quite interesting, is we don't know whether they took random things to war with them. Because obviously people who were practicing archery would have had all sorts of weird things, like forked heads and great big hunting heads. And there's no reason why they wouldn't have taken it with them.
No.
But these definitely weren't issued as a military head.
Yeah.
And you tend to find another reenactorism is that they're horse killers, they're called,
Right.
for shooting horses.
Yeah.
They will mess up a horse, but they're not used for that.
So, I mean, the bottom line, it's neither of us are hunters. Some of you will be, I'm sure, bow hunters, but we're not. And never have been. But my understanding of these is that basically what you're trying to do is to give the biggest wound channel you can so that the beast will bleed out as fast as you can, as fast as it can. Because again, in dense woodland or something like that, if you hit the heart, well, okay, you might get an immediate drop. But essentially, if you don't, the beast is going to run off and it might be 50, 80, 100 yards before it drops. You want it to drop as fast as you can, leave the biggest blood trail you can. And that's really what that thing's all about.
Yeah.
Often the heads were pinned as well. Generally, heads weren't pinned, were they?
Generally, military heads aren't.
So a cross pin through the socket and the shaft, try and hold it together, I suppose.
I would argue that most hunting heads were. Most of the ones that I've seen are pinned,
Yeah.
Because they're very expensive, they're very time consuming to make.
They're multiple use as well, of course, because military heads are single use. You've got to remember that a lot of military goods are single use.
Yep.
So why go to the effort of drilling, which they could do, but probably more likely just drifting a hole through and then pinning it? It's just no point.
Yeah. Whereas these, you're going to pull it out of the animal that you've hunted and take it home with you.
Yeah.
So you want to keep the arrowhead with you. These things aren't cheap. They're not cheap today, and they weren't cheap then.
No. How hard are they to make compared to sort of standard like Type 16 military head? A small. So basically, superficially, me, Mr. Ignorant, these two heads, obviously, of course, different size, but they look very similar. But in terms of making them, how different?
Completely different.
Really?
Completely different, yes.
The way you approach it right from the first moment?
Yeah, that's a two-part head.
Yeah.
That's a socket with barbs welded on.
Three-part head?
Three-part head. No, two-part head.
Oh, really?
One socket, one barb as a weld.
Oh, really? Oh, so the barbs are forged as a one piece. They're not separate on.
Yep.
Okay. Oh,
and they're either brazed on or welded on.
Right.
That's one piece. The big broad head is one piece.
Yeah.
So it's a completely different process. You start with the metal that you've selected is going to make that entire head in one go, whereas you can kind of make choices with these ones about how you want to look. That one, you're looking at about 40 minutes to make a head.
Really?
That's 15.
Yeah.
Maybe 20 minutes, depending on what process you're going for.
And you've made enough of these things that your timings are probably relatively accurate.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I'm not as good as someone like Hector Cole, but I've spoken to Hector, and he would agree that that's roughly the right sort of time frame for those.
I mean, my experience of that kind of skill, once you've been doing it for years anyway, is that you might shave off a little bit of time in here and there, but fundamentally, 40 minutes is not going to become 20. No. It might become 38.
Yeah. To make it look good. I mean, one interesting thing, this is off topic a little bit, but as an arrowsmith, full-time arrowsmith, I'm told a lot by people that you can make them faster than you do, which is true, but you can't make them look like the things in museums.
Right.
So an unskilled arrowsmith, or maybe a trained blacksmith, could make a pointy thing with a socket in a couple of minutes, that's fine. But to have the neck in the right place, and to have the right width and the right taper, and to have the narrowness of the thinness of the wall, and it to be exactly 10 millimetres or 12 millimetres, and it to be straight, that's what takes time. Yeah,
one thing that I really notice about Will's heads, actually, is that it's a hand-forged head with the socket is, it's all hand-done. There are variations. You've got something flattened out and then folded over. Perfectly cone-shaped is never going to be what you get. But Will's heads are remarkably good inside, actually. So from the outside, it looks like an arrowhead, right, I get it. But actually, when you're trying to put it onto a shaft, what you can't see, which is what's going on inside the socket, is really important as well. And I particularly like Will's heads for that, because they go on easily in the sense of there's very little fettling of the shaft to get them to sit straight. So, I can imagine that time is put into that as well. And that's not something, if you just went to a shop and you bought them, that's not something that you would see.
Yeah.
But if you use them, really important.
Yeah, I mean, when I was starting out, before I was making them, I was making the arrows and buying the heads.
Right.
So I was buying them from a lot of different people, and there's some amazing arrowsmiths, like Milos in Slovakia, who makes fantastic heads. Hector, obviously. But when you buy them from a blacksmith who's had a go at making arrowheads, they may look right on the outside, but they come off on crazy because they're not fitting it themselves.
Totally imagine that.
To arrows, so they don't need to worry about it.
Yeah.
So as someone who makes everything, I'm not going to waste time trying to get everything on bent. I just want to make it straight. So that's what I've learned to do. So so that's a very, very different beast to that. So we're talking 40 minutes, one piece of metal. They were made from different processes, but these ones are made from one piece. And it's a hunting head. There's nothing else it's used for. It could be used for other things, but it was designed as a hunting head.
Yeah, but taking this back, what is very characteristic here is obviously the size of, effectively, the wing sections, the planes on the front. Now, an arrow goes straight because you've got something that creates drag on the back, and that's really what you want, a whole load of drag on the back. As soon as you start adding direction to the front, like lift, or if it's been put on slightly squiff, or the blades are different sizes or something, you get an inbuilt direction, an inbuilt steer on the front, and that is the last thing you want with an arrow. Yeah. But is almost unavoidable in a handmade object, a hand set object like this. It's almost unavoidable. So I've had less experience shooting big heads like this. I have done it, and they kind of go fine. But with a crossbow bolt, where they're essentially a lot shorter and a lot less stable, having big heads on the front like this is a nightmare. Yeah. So I did a film years ago, actually, where I think I called it "These Do Not Work," where I put a big swallowtail on the front of a crossbow bolt, shot it at very close range, maybe 10 metres, something like that. And between me and the target, it literally did that. It was extraordinary to see. And it just, what it did not do was go straight. Yep. So I had to reduce the head size, and I do use much smaller barbed heads on the front of my crossbow bolts because of that.
I mean, to counteract that, you can make this bigger and bigger. Yeah. So the fletchings can get taller, but the downside to that is it makes them much, much louder.
And more drag going on, as well.
And more drag, yeah. An animal will hear this coming because it whistles quite loudly.
Yeah. So that comes down to sort of what hunting was about. And I can't say I'm an expert on medieval hunting at all. But if you look at things like the works of Gaston Phoebus, who was writing end of the 14th century, early 15th century, fantastic illustrations of hunting scenes, like how to hunt every animal in every way. And a lot of the hunting is done at close range. So you look at a Hollywood film, and there's a lovely stag distant, 100 metres away, boom, it's done.
With a great big head on it.
With a great big head on it. These will not travel straight. They will not do that. It will hear, it's a prey animal, it's tuned in to the slightest little noise, and these go slower than the sound. Yep. It will hear it, it will move. And, it will move away. And I can get shot at from 25 metres, blunt arrows, 25 metres, and step aside from the arrow. They've got faster reflexes than me. So it leads you to the conclusion that really this kind of head is shot at very close range. I don't know how close that would be, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if it's like 15, 20 metres away is where you shoot your arrow from. And
that's the hunting skill, is getting close enough to do it, not shooting from miles away.
So it's exactly as Will says, it's not being a good shot. That's not the skill of hunting. It's stalking. It's how to get that close. Or if you're a nobleman, and according to Gaston Phoebus, you just get them stuck in a pen and then you just shoot them from here.
That would do it.
That would do it. Because a lot of the hunting was like that. You actually get your verderers, your gamekeepers, to herd up your stuff, corral it, and then you go shoot it.
Fish in a barrel.
Yeah, fish in a barrel. Lovely. Are we done?
Yeah, we're done with that one.
Oh, lovely.
So that, I think, leads us quite nicely on to the Type 16s, doesn't it?
Yeah, great.
So we've got quite a bunch here, actually. These ones are yours?
Yeah, so let's start with these two. So these are military heads.
Yep.
Type 16, and then they've sort of subdivided it. So the one on your right-hand side is what's called a swept one. You can see that the barbs come out. The one on the right side is what's called a closed one, and the barbs come in back towards the shaft again.
And then, this one here, for example, is a copy of the Westminster Abbey one, where the barbs are very tight.
Yeah. So again, that one, it's almost sort of unbarbed, really, in a way. Westminster Abbey. Let's start with this. So I think we probably touched on it. I can't remember how much we talked about, but English arrows, medieval arrows. So, before the Mary Rose time, there is one arrow in existence. Sample size of one, the Westminster arrow, and this is it.
Yep.
That's the only one we have. So the story was it was found, it had been shot up into the belfry or something?
Well,
from
it was
inside
found
the church.
on top of Henry V's chantry, which was built after 1430.
Right.
So it's that date.
Yeah.
Has to be after that point.
Okay.
It's definitely a military arrow.
But it was just some dude inside the church, wasn't it?
I presume so.
I believe
Yeah.
it was from inside.
We don't know, yeah.
Yeah, so military arrow, so hand over.
It's 28 and 7/8 of an inch long. So it falls beautifully in that Mary Rose peak length.
I'd always thought the Westminster Abbey arrow was shorter.
No,
but no,
that's
so
28
basically
and
standard
7/8,
length.
Yeah. 7¼ inch fletchings. The glue's really interesting.
It's been analysed, presumably.
It has not been analysed
So how do we know it's interesting,
Yet.
Will?
yet. I can tell you it's interesting. You have to go with me on
How
that one.
can you tell us it's interesting?
I know it's interesting. The head.
Sorry, is this a pub conversation you ever thought you'd have?
No.
Interesting glues.
Interesting
that I
glues,
know and
yeah.
love.
That information
Anyway,
is
carry
coming.
on,
That
carry on.
information is coming, but not yet. And it's
Interesting glues. Go on.
interesting glues. I mean, and what's most interesting about this arrow, I think, is how tiny it is. So when you talk to a reenactor about
Tiny
a
in what way?
So in a couple of ways, how short it is compared to what we used
But
to
that's
think
kind of
was
like but that's like Mary Rose stuff.
Yes. I mean, okay, so medieval arrows in general are a lot shorter and smaller than people thought they were, or still think
Because there is
they
the
are.
36-inch thing that's running around.
Yeah,
isn't it?
and even the 32-inch thing, which was for a while was the standard medieval arrow length, and what bows were tiller to. 32 inches was the standard. They weren't that long. Some were, but most of them weren't. This, I think, is what you would call a fairly standard medieval military arrow.
Oh, good.
For the length, for the weight, for the stiffness. It's rock hard, this arrow. But
Yeah.
it's
made of what?
this is actually black poplar.
Right.
We don't know what the original one was. It's only been site kind of verified. It hasn't been tested. It's 11 millimetres here.
Yeah.
It's 11.5 millimetres in the middle.
Yeah.
And it's 7 and a bit millimetres down the end.
So very
Tiny
slightly
knock.
barrelled.
Yeah, barrelled, but tiny at the knock.
So barrelling traditionally was done for flight, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
it's
so
for
for
distance.
distance.
Yeah.
But then it's got whopping big fletchings on.
We don't know how high the fletchings were, but we know they were 7¼ inches long. We've got the witness marks from the glue in the binding.
Why would they not do short fletchings for a flight arrow?
Don't know. Maybe the arrow was cut down. Maybe it was reused. We don't
Maybe
know.
it's 36 inches.
Well, we've got, but it's complete. So the
Yeah.
head is still on the
Yeah.
arrow in the museum. So we know that the head was here and the knock was here.
Yeah.
We know how long that arrow
Yeah.
was and how wide it was, and how long the fletchings were.
But they could have been cut super skinny.
They could have been. I mean, yeah, they could have been. These are goose feathers, and they've been cut to that natural grease line.
Yeah.
I don't think you'd want to go a whole lot lower. You could do.
Test it.
Yeah, we should do really. But that's pretty much the pinnacle of a flight arrow, and it flies really well out of bows up to 160, 170 pounds.
And do you know what kind of weight that is?
Yeah, this is 35 grams. It's tiny.
35.
Yeah.
So if you're familiar with the Arrows versus Armour films...
45, sorry.
45.
Yeah.
Arrows versus Armour films, the arrows were sort of 75, 80-ish,
Yep.
weren't they?
Yeah, getting up
Yeah.
to 83.
So
and
really significantly lighter.
yeah, I mean, you can fit. There's nothing to it.
Yeah.
It's going to go a long, long way.
And stop there. Battery.
So the interesting thing about the Westminster Abbey arrow really is the head. From an arrowsmithing point of view and what we're talking about today, one cool thing is that the very end of the head on the original has been broken off.
Right.
So it hasn't bent, it's broken off.
Which means it was hard.
Which means it was hard, yeah. Again, it hasn't been tested.
Hard being is either case hardened or steel.
Yep. Yeah, brittle, basically.
Brittle.
Yeah. But it is a barbed head. It's not very well made
Okay.
because the barbs are uneven, so it hasn't been very carefully made. It may have been a fairly quick head to make.
Yeah, but again, it's that medieval thing. Is we look for perfection in the modern world.
Yeah. It does the job.
There's no reason to say that they would have considered it not very well made. They would have just called it an arrowhead, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Okay, well, it's not as well made as other arrowheads.
Or ones that perhaps you might make.
Yeah.
You know, it's don't fall into the trap ever of thinking that medieval stuff was perfectly made. It was not.
No.
Very perfect was the exception. I'll just show you that head again. So you've made this
Deliberately uneven.
uneven.
Yeah.
So you can see that there, I hope. There you go, obscuring my lovely face. But it is a tiny head,
Yeah.
really small.
That's not a hunting head. That's designed to go
No.
through as many things as it comes up against,
Yeah.
isn't it, really? It'll go through mail. We don't know about plate, do we? Need to test those.
No, we really do need to do that. But I've always pondered this with Type 16s, these little barbed heads where you close them back into the shaft.
Yep.
Is, okay, I wouldn't want to pull that out of my flesh, but it's not going to resist it in a way that a head like that is going to resist coming out. That actually would be a struggle to get out.
Yeah.
That one you could yank, tear a little bit, scream, but it'd be out. That one, you ain't getting that out.
Yeah, that's true.
So what is the function of those closed barbs? Is it just a way of getting cutting edges on there? And actually it's not really about the barbs at all.
Well, that's an interesting point, because that then leads you to the M3 or M2. Yeah. Which is a development of the Type 16.
Let's poke that at camera. So we've got the Westminster and the M2. So the M2 there on your left-hand side is often called a Tudor or a Towton arrowhead.
Yeah.
Misnamed, but we'll come back to that later.
And what's interesting about these two is that from a silhouette point of view, from a distance, they look nothing like. That's got a very wide kind of cutting angle, and it comes in. This one is just this lovely kind of curved shape. But they're made in the same way.
Right.
And all you have to do to make a Type 16 look like an M3 or M2...
Sorry about the plane.
All you have to do to make a Type 16 look like this is start with a wider piece of material for the barbs and grind it in a different way. The process of welding it or brazing it on is exactly the same. So as the barbs get closer and closer to the socket, starting from that wide hunting head, which is probably where they develop from, they get narrower and narrower to go through more things. And then suddenly they get to a point where they're thinking, well, hang on, they're not doing anything, these barbs. We brought them in so much, we may as well make them out of one piece. And then you get these kind of single die made.
And did they do? Oh, we'll talk about that. Let's talk about swaging when we get round to the M3.
Okay. But yeah, so that's your development.
All right. So if we come back to these two Type 16s again.
Yep.
So we've got them there. So you've got the swept one and you've got the closed one.
Yep.
So the swept one on the right-hand side. They've both got cutting edges.
Yeah.
But again, I suppose that the swept one is now more about barbs. That's more about not getting it out.
It's a barbed head, isn't it? Yeah.
And that one is sort of more, it's like a leaf blade head, but with gaps in it.
With gaps in it, yeah.
So that one's not really about sticking in, it's about cutting. That one, the swept one, is about cutting and sticking in.
Yeah.
But is because of the progressively wider cutting edge, if it hits something harder, something tougher, it's going to go through less. So that's less about penetration on anything other than flesh. That would be my thinking.
Whereas this one is starting to look at harder materials because it's got less to do to get through it.
We really, really, really
need to test them,
need to do that film.
Yeah. Now the benefit of these two-part head, these composite heads, is that you can make the big bit, the kind of the big in terms of mass, the big bit out of iron, which is cheap and soft, and then you can attach hardenable material to the outside of it. And that may be what they were doing. Why they were doing it, we don't know. That needs testing, doesn't it? Yeah. But it means that you can do a different process for each one. So you can braze these, or you can fire weld them on. These ones are fire welded. Yeah. So the ones you've got are steel barbs, fire welded to an iron socket, or you can braze them. I mean, this one here, we can talk about later. That's a Mary Rose arrow. That's a brazed head, not a fire welded head, but same thing. So they're choosing two different materials for their own benefits.
Assorted properties, Cost, do you think, or functionality? Is there a reason to go for a wrought iron head functionality? I mean, it's going to be a bit tougher, but...
It's like knives, isn't it? They were making knives out of iron with a very thin steel cutting edge because iron's cheaper than having to go through the process of adding carbon to iron to make steel. So you do as much as you can in the cheap soft material, and then where it really matters, you put steel. Yeah.
Well, you can smelt steel out, so you can get steel rather than iron. But,
okay. But it's harder to work with, isn't it?
It is harder to work with.
And once you're past this point, so where the socket begins,
it's irrelevant.
Mechanically, it's irrelevant. Yeah.
All right. Okay, I think we're probably done on 16s.
Okay. M2,
Tudor
M3,
Towton,
yeah.
M2, M3. Right, so that's this one here. M2, M3. Very commonly called, and I call it this, the Tudor or the Towton arrowhead. Now, apart from the fact anyway that Towton was 1461,
Yep.
was it? Tudor is 1485 onwards, so it's one or the other, but it's probably not both.
Nope.
But in fact, it's neither.
No, it's 14th century, so 1300s onwards. And it's a really, really variable arrowhead shape. This is just a particular one from a museum that I've picked for your arrow.
Actually, going back, is
Yep.
it the Towton head and the Tudor head because they found a lot at Towton
Yep.
and they found a lot in the Tudor period?
I don't know,
it's a great way
I don't
to
know
call
where
it.
Tudor came from. I'm
Yeah.
not sure where that name
Oh,
came
okay.
from. Towton, definitely. They found a whole bunch of brazed heads of this shape at
Fine.
Towton.
So it's a great way to call it, but actually it...
It's way before.
Way
then,
before,
yeah.
okay.
There's a lovely one in Winchester Museum, which is a one-piece head,
Uh-huh.
which dates to way before then. Same silhouette, same shape, but not brazed, not welded, one piece that dates back to 1300s.
Right.
So that shape has been around for
Yeah.
forever.
All right. So it's a slightly curious one for me because of all the arrowheads, I think it's the lightest one, isn't it? Of the
they're
standard military.
8-9 grams. Yeah.
So it's the lightest. Now the thing is, when you're trying to create penetration with an arrow, you're looking for the speed, because the speed of the arrow, the energy that the arrow carries, goes up as a square with the speed. So basically, a little increase in speed, you get a lot more energy with it. Energy is really good for penetration. But what's also really good for penetration is momentum. Momentum goes up, not as a square, goes up linearly with weight. So basically, something heavier and faster is going to penetrate a lot better than something lighter and slower. Well, that's pretty darn obvious, isn't it? We all know that. But what it means by having a very light head on it is that they have not used to the best advantage the possibility of momentum.
Yep.
So they have deliberately made an arrow which has a lower momentum than a heavier one, less likely to penetrate than a heavier one. It goes faster, so it carries a bit more energy because of that. But again, the energy is related to the mass too. So actually, it goes faster, so potentially it could carry more energy if it was heavier, but it isn't heavier. God, I'm going around in circles. The bottom line is, it doesn't carry as much energy and it doesn't carry as much momentum. What's the point?
I mean, what we do know, which is really interesting, is that we've got...
of a Type 9 or something like that. Short
yeah,
Bodkin is
big,
what I'm talking
heavy,
about.
yeah.
So what we classically think of as arm-piercing heads. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
We've got records of bearing and harassing arrows.
Yep.
That's been written down in the period.
Do you know, I think it's Spanish. Arrow is harass.
Is it?
Yeah. So harass and
Harass,
harass
yeah.
has got to be the same root. So, yeah, anyway.
The bearings,
By
the
the by.
bearings are very separate
Yeah.
reference. So a bearing arrow is to do something a long way away, to move their enemy, to direct them, to harass
Why
them.
do you say that?
Because it's in the same context, bearing or harassing arrow, written, bearing or harassing arrow.
Oh, okay. So basically an interchangeable word for whatever.
For harassing, for
Yeah.
annoying somebody. So they're not trying to penetrate armour with a big, heavy anti-personnel head. They're trying to harass them and to move them.
Make them do things.
Make them do things, yeah.
They
That
don't wanna
may be
do.
what that's for.
But okay.
Because they'll go a long way
Yeah.
out of the same weight bow. If you take a big, heavy Type 9
Yeah.
Agincourt arrow and you shoot the same arrow, you shoot this arrow from the same bow, that one's going to go a lot further. This
Yeah.
one's going to go a lot further.
I'm trying to remember now. So off my bow simulator, I think I was getting around about, and I'm going to do this in feet per second. Sorry, people who don't like that, but it's the way my chrono works. I think I was getting around about 165 feet per second off the big, heavy Type 9s,
Right.
and about maybe it was a bit more. Oh no, forget those numbers then. But it was a big difference. It's like about 30 feet per second difference between the Type 9s and the M2s.
Yeah, they'll go a lot further.
Yeah.
They'll go a lot faster. So you move them towards you using light, harassing arrows.
Yeah.
They've got to do something. Either go away or they come towards you.
Yeah.
And then you hit them with the big, heavy arrows that you're going to use to actually take them out, I suppose. So these lightweight, fast arrows on lighter arrow shafts, smaller heads, are are for a very different purpose.
Yeah.
It's not just arrow is for this. They're all used. I mean, they're using these for thousands of years and developing them. They've all got different purposes and different uses.
Yeah.
So I think that's probably what's going on. They're not trying to go through armour.
Okay.
And what's also interesting is if you look at a head like, these are unfinished ones, but if you compare these two, these are the same arrowhead.
Yeah.
Right, in terms of silhouette.
I'll just hold them up to the camera. Yeah.
They'll do the same job once they hit their intended target.
Yeah.
One of those heads, the one that's fitted to the arrow, takes 15, 16 minutes to make.
Yeah.
One of them takes 4 minutes to make.
Does it now?
Yeah.
So you sold me the expensive ones?
Yeah, of course I did.
Nice. Why so?
Because that's made in a die.
That's what we were talking about earlier, swaging.
That's a swaged Tudor, M2 or M3. Takes 4 minutes.
Right.
The exact same arrowhead can take 16 to 20 minutes, and they're still making them.
Yeah.
Even by Towton, we're still finding them in 2 parts, brazed. But you're getting the same arrowhead. Why?
Probably because that's a development.
But that one,
technological development is die forging, would be my guess.
yeah, but they're wrong around. The die forging ones go out earlier.
Do they?
Yeah, so the Winchester arrowhead is made like that.
Right.
In
so,
one piece.
My goodness, this is getting boring now, or nerdy, depending
No,
on
it's
your
not.
point
It's
of
getting
view.
exciting now.
Well, I'm interested. So this one has been die forged. This one has been, had hand individually fabricated in essence.
And fire welded.
And fire welded, so the barbs have been welded on. So die forging, for those of you who don't know, is basically where you get a hard bit of steel with a shape cut in it, another hard bit of steel with a shape cut in it. You put in your red hot metal between, you put the two on top, hammer like hell. What comes out is effectively not completely finished. It's not going to be a one-piece process.
No, you have to cut or grind the corners off, yeah.
But what comes out is an arrowhead. And this was an earlier form.
Yep. So
That
again, the
is
Winchester
weird.
head is late 1300s. And then they're making the exact same shape at Towton in 1460s in 2 parts.
So why are they making it the hard way?
Because you can put hardenable steel on the outside.
Okay, because, all right, fine. So forging a fully steel arrowhead, yes, would be harder. Basically, because when iron is red hot, it is easier, takes less work to forge it and shape it than when steel is red hot.
And it's
So
cheaper.
They're not
Iron
the
is
same
cheaper.
thing. And they're cheaper.
The process to make iron is quicker than making steel, isn't it? So
But they could have swaged that and then welded on steel edges. They could have done.
we could have done.
Maybe we haven't found them.
Maybe we haven't found them. Yeah, exactly. When you think about how many arrowheads were made between, let's say, 1100 and 1600,
About 12, I think.
12,
Yeah, about
maybe.
12.
And all the ones that we found, we're talking millions compared to, let's say, a couple of hundred.
Yeah.
We just don't really know what they were doing.
Yeah, it is a statistically irrelevant sample size that we
Yeah.
have left,
Yeah.
in essence.
But they are fascinating things, aren't they? But they're going backwards, essentially.
That is weird. That is properly weird. I don't get that. Oh, well.
Sorry to confuse you.
Yeah. Right. Okay, so are we done with our
We
M2,
are, I mean,
M3?
We can talk about the
Towton
Mary Rose
Tudor?
while we're on it, because it's the same head.
Yeah.
So, obviously, the Mary Rose is the most famous collection of archery equipment ever found.
Yeah, can I do my little Mary Rose spiel?
Please do.
Lovely. So, as we were saying with the Westminster Abbey arrow, that is our sample size of one of medieval arrows. The next, basically, good collection of archery gear, which is close, is the Mary Rose. So, 1545 is the Mary Rose. But of course, that is now Renaissance. It's post-medieval. It's well into the age of the gun. Armour is beginning to fall away, and it is naval. It is not battlefields. So there's lots of really useful information that we can and have got out of the Mary Rose finds. But what you cannot do is pick that up and translate it and say, therefore, this is what they used at Agincourt, at Cressy, or Poitiers, or whatever.
Yeah.
It can just act as a guide.
Yeah.
And I think that is a really important thing to remember. So that is true of things like bow weights,
Yep.
arrow lengths, head weights, all of these things. It helps, but it doesn't tell us.
Yeah. what I like doing is comparing the Mary Rose arrow to the Westminster Abbey arrow.
Yeah.
So we're talking 1430, so way in the glory days of the longbow.
Yeah.
And we're talking 1540s, way beyond.
So the Westminster Abbey one, this one really is genuinely
medieval, yeah. And this one's Tudor, Renaissance.
Yeah.
But they are the same length.
Yeah.
They are the same weight.
Oh, really? How close? Same weight?
Within 5 grams or something.
Yeah.
They've got roughly the same length fletchings.
Yeah.
They've got a horn insert. They've got the same diameter knock, so the bowstrings were the same.
Okay, so everything I just said was complete junk then, yeah?
No. And they've got very similar weight heads. And the Mary Rose heads were barbed, so was the Westminster Abbey head.
Uh-huh.
What we don't know is exactly what you were saying, is whether naval archery was different to land archery. But we can say that arrows actually, way back in the heyday of the longbow, are very similar, if not sometimes identical, to the Westminster Abbey arrow, to the Mary Rose arrow. Because actually, people think of, I mean, this is my Mary Rose spiel actually, is that for a long time, the Mary Rose arrow was 32 inches long. This is for reenactors. Half an inch at the head, 3/8 of an inch at the knock, with a Tudor bodkin on it, which is a one-pieced square Tudor bodkin. Actually, when you look at them, there were 3,500 that came up. When you look at them, they were all different weights and sizes, and some of them were smaller than the Westminster Abbey arrow, so 10 millimetres at the head, and down to 7 millimetres at the knock. They weren't all these great, big, heavy, half-inch arrows.
Okay. So, where I struggle with this is it's a bit like a modern army now, where it's a lot more relatable and understandable. But everybody is essentially issued with the same rifle.
Yep.
With the same ammunition type. So what you don't do is go back to the arms depot and go, can I have 2 boxes of this, 4 of that, and Bob, what do you want? Oh, that's a weird size, Bob. What you got that for? Oh, anyway, Bob needs that. It's not like that. I can't see that it would be like that on a ship either. I mean,
neither.
Of course, there are other special, people have got different rounds, but essentially there is a standard pistol round, a standard rifle round. That's what I mean. I can't believe that it was different.
No, I agree. I agree. And we also know that the bow...
So they're all issued arrows?
Yeah.
For anybody?
For anybody.
Even though they're different sizes?
Yeah. And they're different sizes within one bag as well.
Right.
And they're different woods, and they're different lengths within one bag of arrows.
Now, what I find really interesting about that is I thought, and I think I'm right, that there was a guide for this is what the arrow should be that was issued. Standard arrows were issued by the tower, make them like this. That was the case, wasn't it?
I don't think so.
No?
No. We know that the head, we know that there was an arrowhead.
Yeah.
Arrowsmiths must make arrowheads to the pattern of the iron head supplied.
Oh, I thought it's the whole...
No, it's just the arrowhead.
So actually, what comes after that?
Who knows? We've got records of good arrows, or best arrows, or arrows fletched with peacock, or arrows fletched with swan, or arrows fitted with these type of heads, duckbill heads or whatever. But there's no, must be this length, must be this weight, must be this size, nothing.
Oh, I thought we had that.
Nope. Nope. So when you look at the Mary Rose, what they found, the actual finds are kind of tell you more actually, because they found great big chests full of arrows. And in these chests, the arrows are within leather discs, known as arrow bag spacers now.
Yeah.
We don't know what the bags look like. And within those discs are 24 holes, and each arrow in there is different. Different lengths, different sizes, different weights, different woods.
But you don't mean different in the sense of you've got 24 different ones as a variety?
No,
pack.
they're just roughly the same. They've just been made quickly, probably. Yeah. And the same with the bows. So the great big chests come up, and there's 50 bows per chest, and they're all roughly the same, but they're also all going to be a little bit different. Some will be 160, 120, 180, whatever. Yeah. You can't, we don't think anyone was going, right, what's this bow? How much does it weigh? You can have that one, you can have that one.
Oh, these arrows. You got any arrows in a blue bag?
Exactly. It's ludicrous in the middle of a battle to be going through that. So you pick up your bow that you're given, you've given a bag of arrows, you better go and use them.
That kind of work. That's
all we've got.
So...
maybe we're missing parchment tied to them saying these arrows are for this bow.
Yeah.
But
so part of what we mean is kind of work is an arrow shaft has a stiffness to it. Of course it does. And when you shoot it, you're pushing it from the back there, the string pushes it from the back, the arrow will naturally bend and flex as it leaves the bow. Depending on how much it bends and flex, depends how well it will shoot off that weight bow. Yep. And they will all kind of shoot off that weight bow, off any weight bow, unless it's super light. But basically, any arrow will shoot off any bow. The question is, does it go a bit left? Does it go a bit right? Will it go a bit up? Will it go a bit down? And different arrows will do different things. So there will be a stiffness and a weight of arrow that suits your bow really well.
Yep.
But everything else will kind of shoot off it too. And I suppose that's what we're getting at, really, is they were all kind of in the right ballpark.
Yep.
And they all shot, but some will always shoot better than others.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine what they were doing back then when they were making millions of arrows for campaign is they're picking up their bundles of arrow staves, like 15 mil square planks, and they're going, whoop, that's one of those, that's one of those. I'm going to make a whole bunch of these that are roughly 100-pound bow weights, and they can go off into a bag and whatever.
Do you think they did?
I mean, that's what I do.
Yeah, but you're different. You sell by the half dozen, the dozen. Somebody wants a specific number because it shoots their bow best.
Yeah. I mean...
You know, I don't want arrows for a 140-pound bow for my 90-pound bow. I don't want them.
No, but if you know that a military weight bow... Okay, so let's rephrase this. Maybe they knew that military bows were from 140 to 180, and they went through all of their arrow stock and went, that's safe, that's safe, that's safe.
Yeah.
Let's use all of these for military arrows, and all of these are domestic.
Yeah, that I get.
Yeah.
But you've also got two different markets.
Yeah.
You know.
So your archer isn't going, that's no good, that's no good. You can pick up your bow, pick up your bag of arrows, and that's what you've got.
Although, what I would say, and this is an intriguing thing, and I don't know the answer to it, so I don't know the truth of this at all, but soldiers then, I think, are similar to soldiers now. I don't see why anything would change. People basically don't. So it's one of those classic things that night before a campaign, displacement activity, just want to do something, anything. You sharpen your knife, you sharpen your sword, you sharpen your arrowheads, you put a bit more wax on it, you check that your bowstrings fits properly.
And you go through and flex your arrows. And
all of that, you flick, all of that stuff. But also there's a series of pictures where I made a quiver that fitted on a sword.
Yep.
And I looked at the pictures and I thought, that's preposterous, I've got to make one. So it's a little wooden box quiver that fits onto sort of falchion type sword. Put your crossbow bolts in. Well, it takes 2 or possibly 3 crossbow bolts and it's full. And you couldn't make it bigger, that's the way it is. Clearly that's not enough for a campaign or a battle. So what the hell is it doing? Is it I've run out and they're my emergency go-to bag, or, and this is where I think, is those are the ones that you know shoot really well from your bow. They're not the ones you've been given, they're not the ones that kind of, work. But they're the ones that you know that you stand a really good chance of hitting that guy with a lovely plume on his helmet at 100 yards. You go for those ones.
Yep.
And I suspect that it's going to be true for longbow archers too, that they will practice displacement activity. Oh, this arrow's a goodie, that feels great. I'll mark it, I'll put it in the back of my quiver,
Yep.
So there'll always be some, I think, that they know shoot really well.
We saw Joe do it for our film. So I made so many arrows for those films, and he went through before and was like, that's better, that's better, that's better.
Yeah.
We'll shoot them last, and we'll get through all of these ones for the testing, and those are going to work best.
Yeah.
So it's just a natural thing to do.
Yeah, I think
they're all safe for that bow, but these ones will shoot really well.
Yeah.
We'll try and avoid these ones because they're a little bit whippy or whatever, and that's just
yeah.
natural human.
It is.
Yeah. So that's the Mary Rose one done, I think. We haven't discussed the actual arrow much, but that's all right.
That only leaves fire arrows.
Ah.
Fire arrows.
Fire arrows. They didn't exist, did they?
Fire arrows? Nah.
Hollywood myth.
Hollywood myth.
Good. Done.
Fire arrows. Right, what I am going to say is, I don't know when this bit is going to come out, but either you've seen the most extraordinary film about fire arrows ever, or the most extraordinary film about fire arrows ever will be coming out. It's one of those two things. So, for years, I have been wanting to look at fire arrows, and they are fascinating. And I made some compound for fire arrows years ago, because they're not perhaps what you think they are. Made quite a lot of it. Had a good job at burning down my old boss's workshop with it, which means that actually I've got good insight into what setting off quite a lot of it inside a building is like. But they have specialised heads. So what it is not is a regular kind of arrow like that, where you just wrap a bit of cloth around the end, bit of string to hold it there, dip it in some paraffin, light it, shoot it. It's not that. It might, or it might not, be something like this, which is a fire basket. Curious thing. But what we do have both recipes of, instructions for, arrowheads for them, and indeed arrowheads with the compound still in place are ones much like this. So what you've got is a socket or a tang. Very often they were tang too. Then you have a long shaft here, fairly thin, and small barbed heads on the end. This is quite a big one, might be a bit smaller. Sometimes barbs on both sides, sometimes barbs on one side. Crossbows, longbows, muskets. They shot arrows out of muskets too. Wouldn't want to try it, but they did. And around this part here you have an inflammable compound. I'm not going to tell you too much in this film because there's a lot more to come. Inflammable compound, wrapped around, held down with string, fuse in the end, light it, shoot it. Fascinating things.
Yep.
What they are absolutely not is just an inflammable liquid, bit of pitch, bit of tar, tallow, stuff like that. That is not what medieval arrows were. They were far more sophisticated than that. But I'm just going to show you this one here. So you can see that it doesn't, the tang on it is not round, because if it was round, when you switch the compound on, it would sort of rotate, it'd be no good at all. This is another one that Will's done, quite a common form here, where you've just twisted the shank. Yeah? But what it does is it gives some bite for when you're switching the compound around it. Stops it rotating and spinning off. It's a bit like barbecuing meat on a round skewer. Your skewer should be flat or something like that, and it doesn't rotate round on a barbecue. Anyway, I hate this. So I am going to deliberately keep this a little bit sketchy about exactly what's going on. But these sort of tanged heads would seem to be, maybe there's just a lot of them on the continent where they tended to go for crossbows more than longbows in that sense. But there's a lot of them in illustrations and some existing of crossbow heads on crossbow bolts. Used in naval warfare, used in sieges against towns and so on. And I think that's all I really want to say about these at the moment. There's just too much good stuff that's coming. But then we get to our fire basket. So tell me about making it.
They're a nightmare.
Right.
So you've got to be good at fire welding.
Yeah.
You've got to be good
and
at...
it's fine work as well.
Yeah, it's not just great big chunky stuff. What you tend to see a lot in reenactorisms is an onion twist fire arrowhead. In fact, almost nobody's making them properly.
Onion twist in the sense of these
it's
are...
It's a 4-bar, it's a great big 4-bar thing, which is then twisted round and then untwisted, like the end of a curtain pole.
Oh, right.
Or the top of a fence thing, because that's how blacksmiths approach twisting.
Okay.
And that's become the reenactor fire basket look. They look nothing like that.
Yeah.
They're normally 3-bar.
Because that's an easier way to make it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of metal going on. They've got to be an arrowhead still.
Yeah.
Once you start putting 4 bars and you start twisting it, and it's this great big lump on the end of an arrow, there's no point in them. They don't shoot at all. So this is actually quite a light head. It looks like quite a big. This is actually slightly bigger than they probably were, to be honest. They're quite light work. 3 bars, and they're not twisted. They're just opened up slightly enough to get something in there.
Right. Okay. Right. I was wondering. So what you don't do is fire weld it with those 3 bits open, and then close them in and then fire weld the end.
No.
You bring them up as a bundle of 3.
Yep.
You fire weld here and here.
Yep.
And then you open them up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. There are other processes going on, but that's essentially what's happening there. Yeah. And then you forge your point and your socket, or your tang.
Mm.
So they're not easy things to make.
Yep.
You have to know what you're doing with fire welding and with various multi-bar construction work. So there's a lot of work involved in making something that it's going to have to work, isn't it?
Yeah, you are going to want it to work.
Yeah.
But that's true, of an awful lot of weapons, but especially when they're expensive, because you've got to consider it. But here is my problem with this. So if we take this more normal, because you find a lot of these, actually, a lot of these incendiary arrowheads are in the record. We've got them, right? Very, very few of these fire baskets. I've only actually found a picture of one. I'm sure there'll be more out there. But I've only found a picture of one. So what there aren't are lots of them. They may or may not be a bit earlier. I'm not sure how well we can date it. I'm not sure I can remember any in artwork, but I have seen this style in artwork. So they're unusual.
Yep.
These ones actually work with a chemical composition. What you're not doing is just bundling some embers around it or something like that. It is a sophisticated, cleverly thought out chemical composition that goes on these. I don't think we know enough about these to know how they were used, but when you look at the books that do cover them, it seems to be that what you do is you fill these with a pitch or a tallow or tar and cloth, maybe wrap it around a little bit, set it on fire, shoot it. What I can tell you from my own misplaced childhood is that will go out or stand a really good chance of going out. And if they're expensive and they just go out, 90% of them go out, that's no good at all. So you want it to stay lit. Well, maybe what you do is you pack it with embers, right? Probably not that many embers.
No.
But you pack it with some embers. You put something around it like maybe damp grass or something like that. Wrap it with cloth. Got to do that pretty quick before launching them. Nothing pre-prepared. These ones all pre-prepared, fused, ready to go. You've got to make these up as you are casting them. So you make it up, hand it to your archer real quick, boom. And then what happens? Now the thing about these is you've got something burning fiercely, stuck in the wood, yank the shaft, well the shaft comes off, leaves the head there, brilliant. Burning against target. These ones, really quite fragile,
Yep.
comes in, hits the target, that's all going to collapse on impact. Your ember is probably going to get turned rather from a big chunky ember to a pile of dust,
Yep.
sparks. Doesn't do that much to light things, it's not particularly useful.
And you can pull it straight out again.
And you can
There's
pull
no
it straight
barbs, yeah.
Or it doesn't even really dig in.
Yeah.
So what it's not doing is delivering a fire against your target. Is it against thatch? Yeah, okay, that would work against thatch, but
Thatch isn't normally bone dry. It's normally quite wet actually, and quite dense.
on the
It's
outside.
hard to set fire to thatch.
Yeah.
Harder than you'd think.
So maybe thatch, middle of summer. Thatch in the autumn, not so good.
It's a lot of work to make an arrow designed for thatch against in the middle of summer, isn't it?
It just strikes me as a staggeringly inefficient way to deliver what you want. And especially if these are used in the age of gunpowder. So gunpowder is kicking around, let's say from 1300, it's a bit earlier, but let's say from 1300 there is gunpowder technology here. Why are you tossing embers? Why are you tossing embers at thatch when you can be tossing gunpowder? Just doesn't work for me. Now, I'm not saying it's not a fire arrow. I'm just saying convince me. So come on in. Now, I have another hypothesis that I have absolutely zero evidence for at all. But what I do know that they did, chemical warfare in medieval times was a thing. So, you can get clay pots which are full of lime powder. Lime is really caustic, burns any wet membranes, throats, nose, eyes. And they would throw pots of lime powder around. Lands, big cloud of nasty dust, don't want to breathe it in, can't really be near it. Could they have put lime in here and a cloth around it? For me, that explains a little bit the delicate nature of the head.
Yep.
That actually on impact,
You want it to collapse, yeah.
It collapses, poof, big cloud of dust.
Yep.
Don't know. Maybe I'm romanticising. There's nothing romantic about that. Maybe I'm telling a great tale and it'd be brilliant at reenactment events. I am going to test it. So what I'll do is I'll mock up some crappy ones and just MIG weld it together.
Yep.
And I'll test it. Because I do think it's intriguing. Will it work? Don't know. Do I think it'll work? Yes. Will it work well? No idea, really. But I don't really think this was a fire arrow.
It's an interesting point because as a maker, you're a maker and I'm a maker, we spend a lot of time making rubbish. I don't know about you actually, maybe you don't. I spend a lot of time making rubbish.
No rubbish. What rubbish do you make, Will? Come on, you choose your words carefully. What do you mean by that?
Pure junk. Because you want to try things out.
Oh, I see what you mean. Try it. Oh, that doesn't work, throw it away. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. Right now I've got...
So in an archaeological context...
Obviously I make everything perfect.
I know you do, but I definitely don't. So if I'm having a bad day and I'm bored of making type 9s and I want to just do something different and I want to see if I can make a chisel that works in a certain way or a new material that's come in, iron from some weird source, I want to see what it's like. I'll make something weird.
Lives we lead.
Yeah, right, Blacksmith lives.
It's amazing we've got partners.
So if you make something...
Sorry, I've got to stop you there. So I walked in one day into the house and I've been listening to the radio and I just said, "Hey Lou, do you know why the Blackfriars station in London is called Blackfriars?" And it is because of Dominican monks or something like that. And she just looked at me and she went, "That is why you have no friends." Oh, you harsh woman.
She's not wrong.
Thanks, Will. Anyway, carry on. Sorry.
So that's all right. So if you make something because you're a creative person and you just want to make something and just do something to test yourself and it doesn't work or it works or whatever, and you put it down somewhere, in 1,000 years when someone digs that up, they've got this thing that you've made knowing it's not a thing, but they're going to go, "What the hell was that for?" And the theories will come out. You can't then say, no, I was just playing around. Could that be one of those? Could that be a blacksmith going, "I wonder if I can do that"? Wouldn't that be a cool idea? And then someone digs it up and it becomes a really important item. Because imagine my forge floor is a dirt floor.
Yeah.
I can drop a magnet in this floor and find things that the blacksmith in before me made. Horseshoe nails, all kinds of weird bolts that he's tried to make. I found a knife in here once that he tried to make. If you analyse everything as important, it all becomes too important. And it could just be a day where he wasn't thinking much and tried something. This thing is crazy looking. If someone found that in the bottom of my forge in 1,000 years' time, they're going to want to know what it's for, what it's made from, how it was used.
Oh, you know what it was? I think that there was a crystal in here.
Exactly.
It had spiritual significance.
Exactly. It's a ritual. It's a ritual thing.
Yeah.
If that was on Time Team, that would be a ceremonial spear topper, right? And it's just become a fire arrowhead. But we don't know that.
But actually, again, this is one of the things that I try to avoid when I can, is saying things that I don't know is true. And of course I say things which is not true because I make mistakes that everybody else does, but I try really hard not to. And, you know, we've got a fantastic book over there about arrowheads.
Yep.
We've got the same one. And it lists it as a fire basket. I've known it as a fire basket all of my reenactment historical life.
Yep.
How do I know that's a fire basket? Where did that information come from? More to the point, where did the guy in the book get it from?
Yep.
And what book did he get it out of? And was it, as is ever the case, and the bane of our lives, some Victorian going,
I know what that is.
"Oh, I think you could put fire in there." Yes, you could. Oh, what should we call it? I know, let's classify it as a fire basket.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't surprise me if the first known thing was in Gillette-le-Duc or something like that, or Payne Galway.
Yeah, we've got to be kind of careful, haven't we?
I don't know.
All we know, it's got a socket, it's got an empty cage, and it's got a point.
Maybe
we
it
know
wasn't
that.
an arrowhead.
Exactly. Maybe it was something completely different.
Actually, maybe it wasn't an arrowhead. Maybe, really, genuinely, maybe it wasn't.
Maybe
an
it was a decorative finial or
It's
something.
called winding wool.
There you go.
Goes on the end of your spindle.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think after that, there's probably 15 of you out there screaming, "Look at all these pictures of fire baskets at sieges."
Yeah, exactly. That's what we need.
We're going to look like a couple of idiots, but anyway.
We do anyway, it's all right.
No, sort of. I prefer the word cretin.
Cretin's good. Yeah. A creative cretin, that's what we are.
Yeah, no, it's intriguing. I would like to test it as a fire arrow. I'd like to test it as something else. But actually, it hadn't occurred to me. It is genuinely possible. It is not an arrowhead at all.
Yeah.
It's just got a socket on it,
Yeah.
like a lot of other things had sockets.
Exactly, yeah. There are knives with sockets on, aren't there? That, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know.
Don't know. Tell us.
Yeah, yeah.
Are we done?
I think we're done. I'm done. Are you done?
I think we're probably done. We're done. Right, well, I think that's probably pretty much everything we know about arrowheads and could be bothered to talk about.
Yeah, I mean, it's worth pointing out that there are loads of different varieties and variations on every single one. So if we take a Type 16, for example, okay, that one's got small barbs and close, but they can come out miles, they can be swept in.
Type 16, the spiky one there.
There've been a couple found recently at Barnet that are linked to the Battle of Barnet that are very long and pointy and suddenly come out with a very narrow barbs.
Yeah.
There's so many different types of every single head.
Yeah. And there's a few others that we certainly haven't covered, like chisel heads, and there's like a chisel head with a hole through it.
Yep.
All sorts of bits and pieces. Which I suppose we ought to go digging. Maybe we should do a part 2 or a part 18 or whatever.
Part 18,
which is all the completely weird and freaky ones.
Yep.
That,
We just don't understand, haven't been tested yet. Yeah.
Yeah.
Archery has been a thing in existence from before we can even imagine.
Yeah, when did bows come in?
Well, exactly. I mean, we've got Urtsey at 3,500 BC, haven't we?
There's cave paintings that, like, you know,
yeah, exactly.
25, 40,000 years ago of bows, aren't there? I'm not making that
so that's a projectile and a bow.
I'm not making that up.
I don't know. The longbow, as I know of it, the longbow and the arrow is Urtsey. That's the oldest version I know of, which is 5,000 years old.
Yeah.
Way before then. It's way before then.
I'm sure they're bows.
So that's using a pointed projectile to do something with. The thought that we know everything about that is insane.
Yeah.
Completely insane. We can't trick anybody into thinking that we know what they were using, why they were using it. It was a different world when they were using it. Even the 1400s, when you think about Agincourt, we think we know now what the bow and the arrow was like.
Yeah, but you put it into,
We don't.
our level of familiarity. I mean, that is a world as alien as me moving to the jungle in Borneo for me.
There's a good chance that somebody from 1415 would look at these and go, no.
Yeah.
These are the wrong size, they're the wrong shape, the fletchings are wrong, their heads are wrong.
Well, actually, and this is not disparaging Will's work at all, or hopefully my own, it's just a realistic vision of it, is that had your father been doing this, your grandfather been doing this, you've been trained up as an apprentice all your life, you are surrounded by it, you've been in a workshop of 40 other guys making arrowheads.
Yep.
You are going to be better than Will is at it.
Yep.
And the same is exactly true for what I do as well. So what I can say is Will makes really nice stuff and it will be close to what the guys were doing. That I'm very confident of. Is it as good as what's been turned out in the London Incorporated Arrowhead Company? Probably not. But that, that's just a realistic assessment of where we all are with our skills.
And the trouble is we haven't got enough stuff from then to go, okay, that's what they all looked like.
Yeah.
Well, that was the standard. The heads that we found are completely outliers from what actually was being used. I mean, someone might turn up and look at these and go, why would you put a crossbow bolt head on an arrow? Yeah. They were never like that.
Idiot.
Arrows were long and thin. Crossbows were Type 9s. We don't know if that was the case or not.
No, we don't. God, there's a lot of things we don't know.
We don't know anything. And the more we learn by making, the more we learn that we've got things to learn. So it's...
Yeah, but I have found that so much. I remember in my very early days, there was a bollock dagger handle in the Wallace collection.
Yep.
And it's got this sort of weird... Not weird. It's just got a little shaped V that goes down between the balls on it. And I tried to replicate it, and it just wasn't working. And then one day I made one, and it was like this late or whatever. I had to make it as quick as I could, and I made this thing as quick as I could, and I got this perfect V down the middle, and it's just like, okay.
Yep.
Just these little things you find out, and you can only find it out by making.
Yeah. I'm making a lot of them.
Yeah. Just becoming really familiar with it.
Yep. I've learnt a new process recently on a Type 9 arrowhead that makes it even quicker than it was before.
Yeah, no, but I do the same.
And I can't imagine how many hundreds I've made now, and I'm still learning that one arrowhead, how to make that one arrowhead slightly faster, and they look even better than they did before. Yeah. So. Yeah,
I mean, I was making a particular knife form called a bandwehr, which has got sort of big bolsters on it at the front. And again, last time I made one, I just went, that's an easier way of doing the same job.
Yep.
And that's exactly the sort of thing that had you been an apprentice, you just know it, you learn it, it'd be in your blood.
Yep.
But I'm having to rediscover it all over again.
Yep. And we've only got 2 or 3 to look at, so you just...
loads in that case, but yes. Yeah, you've got some areas of what you do is very scant material.
Yeah.
And I guess by the nature of what you do, an awful lot of what you look at is seriously corroded.
Yeah. Or really good because it's never been used and it's been held and was probably never used in a military context. Or you've got really rusty bits that you have to kind of x-ray and look through and see in that sense what they were doing.
Yeah. I mean, I've got... Even if something rusty comes out of the ground, it's very similar in terms of construction techniques to a lot of other stuff. So, you know, you can just go, well, clearly it's made like that.
Yep.
You know, so I do, in many respects, probably have an easier job than you do.
And arrowheads are this big, aren't they? So once they've got a little bit rusty, there's not a lot left to look at.
No, it's true. There's a lot of interpretation there.
Yeah.
Anyway, that was a long talk.
It was, yep.
Hope you enjoyed it.
I enjoyed it.
Two blokes chatting. Yeah, no, I loved it, actually. We filmed something else this morning, and actually this is the bit that we were looking forward to doing the most.
Yeah.
Because there's no time pressure on it. No pesky YouTube telling you it's got to be down to 12 minutes. Anyway.
This wasn't 12 minutes.
It was not 12 minutes. Hope you enjoyed it. See you guys. Will, thank you.
No worries. Thank you very much. Cheers for watching.
Cheers. Bye-bye.